Ron's vision gradually became blurry, and the scenery around him became distorted. He felt that the Grim Reaper had quietly come behind him. The feeling of being on the verge of death spread all over his body. His mind was blank, and he could not even think. Am I going to die? Ron seemed to hear a voice in his heart. He could not muster any strength, and at the same time, his power was finally exhausted. The black fog on his body disappeared. In an instant, Ron felt that all the fire elements around him were rushing toward him. Ron's black robe slowly began to burn. Sure enough, it's still not working. Ron's face was full of smiles, and his body slowly collapsed. He tried hard to turn his head back. Looking at the road behind him, he showed a bitter smile. He did not bring any potions. Now, he could not even go back. Dying here, maybe is not a bad choice. I'm tired, really tired. Ron's eyelids gradually became heavy, and his body slowly leaned against the wall. Suddenly, he felt that his body was no longer in pain. He could not even feel a trace of pain. He knew that this was the precursor to death. The dead could not feel pain. Sure enough, he's still going to die. His power can't support him to the end. Although the candidate had been decided, Lawfirth still sighed at the fall of a human genius. Maybe this kid's future may not be worse than that level. 15 Dragonhawk. Lawfirth thought. He did not know why such a thought suddenly popped up in his mind. She knew that it was too late to rush over now. For that moment of hesitation, she shed tears of regret. If she had rushed over earlier, things would not have turned out this way. No one laughed at Bellis. No one in the hall said anything. They were all silently looking at the magic crystal ball. The atmosphere was so quiet that it was somewhat oppressive. Looking at Ron, who had completely lost the ability to resist and the will to live, their eyes were full of sympathy and regret. In their eyes, the willpower this human had displayed had already surpassed many powerhouses of the sacred domain. At this time, in the blazing path inside Will Volcano, Rojun's soul ring suddenly turned dark. The soul ring on his finger suddenly lit up strangely, as if it had sensed the arrival of a threat, emitting a faint light. In Ron's mind, the energy whirlpool hovering above his soul suddenly spun crazily. A vast amount of soul energy overflowed from the whirlpool, constantly enriching Ron's already weak soul. Due to the crazy influx of a large amount of soul energy, Ron's consciousness recovered a little. He opened his eyes slightly. Ron stood up with difficulty. His scarred body moved slightly. A powerful soul energy seeped out of his body and tightly wrapped around his body. This soul energy was more condensed and thick than before. This is the power of the soul ring. The power of the soul ring has awakened again. Ron was surprised and happy. He carefully looked at the quaint ring in his hand and gently stroked it. His face was full of joy. It was this soul ring that had saved him every time he was in danger. I need to work harder. With the power of the soul ring, Ron's confidence suddenly increased. He used a little strength and suddenly jumped up a few steps. At this time, in the meeting room of the dragons, there was a cry of surprise, applause, and praise. Good boy. Come on. Run to the top of the mountain quickly. This kid is amazing. Everyone in the meeting room cheered. They were sincerely happy for the courage and willpower of this human kid. Only Colorado's face was unfriendly. Ron's speed became faster and faster. His steps were light, as if he had the help of God. He even used the Shadowmas spell to increase his speed. In an instant, he jumped far away and was about to reach the top of the mountain. Suddenly, Colorado seemed to have thought of something. His eyes widened in an instant, and he cried out in panic. This is impossible. According to Colorado's calculations, Ron's power had not even reached the sacred domain. It was impossible for him to last for so long. He had set off from the foot of the mountain to the top. Even a God Realm powerhouse might not be able to do that. How'd he do it? Of course, Colorado did not report this to the elders of the dragons. The scene shown in the magic crystal ball was similar. They did not expect Ron to set off from the foot of the mountain. He did it. He really did it. Looking at the magic crystal ball floating high in the air, Bella's eyes were filled with tears. She was so excited that she could not control herself. Ron ran all the way. His body turned into a cloud of black mist, spiraling and rising like a black dragon. Below his feet, the boiling lava reflected the mountain wall red. The temperature in the blazing path became even higher. Almost there. Almost there. Ron repeated these words over and over again, his body not stopping. At this moment, a light finally appeared on the road ahead. I'm at the top of the mountain. Ron was ecstatic. He ran a few steps and shot out like an arrow. Boom! With a loud sound, the entrance of the cave seemed to spurt out flames. A black figure flew out of the cave like a fireball and landed steadily on the ground. I'm finally here. When Ron landed on the ground, he breathed a sigh of relief. He felt his body lighten. The monstrous flames and huge power disappeared in an instant. There was still the residual heat of the flames on his body. It was very warm and cool. Different from the blazing path, the top of a volcano was a world of ice and snow. Ron's hot boots stepped on the thick snow, and the snow slowly melted. This is the top of a volcano? Ron looked at the surrounding scenery carefully. He saw that the top of a volcano was not empty. Instead, there were tall buildings like a castle. Below the castle, a few sharp stone pillars stood tall. Below the foot was a wide square covered with snow. Snowflakes fell from the sky. The walls of the top of the mountain were covered with a thick layer of snow, like a piece of silver armor. Now that he was at the top of the mountain, where should he go? At this moment, Ron was worried. He stepped on the snow and walked forward aimlessly. You're finally here, Ron. I've been waiting for you here for a long time. At this time, an abrupt voice came from behind Ron. Who is it? Ron suddenly realized that there was someone here. He dodged and retreated a few steps, making a defensive posture. It's me. The level 15 Dragonhawk Joss slowly walked out of the castle hall. He was wearing a cloak that tightly wrapped around his sturdy body. His face was expressionless as he stared coldly at Ron. Don't worry, it's easy for me to kill you. There's no need for me to sneak attack you from behind. It's you? What do you want? Ron still did not let down his guard and asked in a deep voice. What do I want? Joss was stunned for a moment. Then he sneered. You still dare to ask? The third round of the Foreign Dragons assessment is not over yet. Don't forget, there's only one quota this time. Chapter 510. It doesn't make sense. It's impossible. How could he climb to the top of the mountain? He set off from the foot of the mountain. How could he? Colorado couldn't believe his eyes. If it weren't for the fact that the magic crystal ball clearly showed that Ron was at the top of the mountain, he would have thought that he was seeing things. He finally reached the top of the mountain. Should I congratulate this human lad? An elder of the dragons said, but his opponent is a level 15 dragon eagle. There's no way he can win. Another elder said, give up. This should be his best choice. He climbed to the top of the mountain with so much difficulty. It's a pity to give up just like that. Is he going to die there? The elders of the dragons spoke one after another. It was obvious that they didn't think highly of Ron. They thought that Ron's only way out was to give up. Otherwise, it would be a dead end. Although he had already mentally prepared himself, Ron still underestimated the powerful pressure brought by this terrifying level 15 magical beast when he really faced it. Ron took a deep breath and looked at Joss calmly. I have to admit that you're the strongest opponent I've ever met. However, I won't admit defeat so easily. Before Ron could finish speaking, a trace of anger flashed across Joss's eyes. The fiery red cloak on his body suddenly rose high, revealing the scales inside. Joss's leather-gloved hand moved slightly, and his body shot up like lightning. Joss was too fast. He was in front of Ron in no time. Ron didn't even have time to react. He only felt pain in his body and was lifted up by the neck. In the snow, Joss held Ron by the neck and let him struggle. His face was full of anger. Opponent? What makes you think you're qualified to be my opponent? Let me tell you, you're just an ant in my eyes. I can kill you at any time. Let go. Ron's neck was pinched by Joss, and he couldn't breathe. His face was red as he spat out 2 words with difficulty. However, he felt that he had to do something. Pung. Ron's body suddenly emitted a large amount of black fog, and his eyes turned a deep green. Fog concealment technique. Ron's body turned into a cloud of mist and suddenly broke free from Joss' grasp. Just as Ron thought that he had succeeded, Joss's eyes were sharp and his hands were fast. He suddenly punched out and hit Ron's abdomen before he could use the misconcealment spell. Ron's misconcealment spell was broken, and he fell to the ground. His body curled up like a shrimp, and he lay on the ground moaning in pain. Joss smiled coldly. "Look at what you've become. You're just a little worm. Do you think you're worthy of being my opponent?" After saying that, he kicked Ron again. This kick was so heavy that it sent Ron's body flying. Ron's body fell heavily to the ground and rolled a few times. At this moment, he had rolled to the edge of the cliff at the top of the mountain, and half of his body was sticking out of the cliff. Seeing Ron being tortured by Joss through the magic crystal ball, most people's eyes were filled with sympathy. Only Colorado had a gloating look on his face. The anger in Bella's heart burned fiercely, and a deep murderous intent flashed in her eyes. If this brat dares to kill Ron, no matter who it is, we can't let him off, Bella's thought to herself. Ron was dizzy from the fall. Snowflakes covered his mouth and nose. He coughed a few times, and a trace of blood slowly flowed down the corner of his mouth. He raised his head with difficulty and saw that Joss' ghostly figure had appeared in front of him again. The weak won't die if they don't resist. Why don't you understand? Let me tell you, Ron, even if you don't want to be a foreign dragon now, I won't let you go. Joss stepped on Ron's chest and sneered. I'm afraid killing you will dirty my hands. Haha, just jump down from here. This will be the end of it. Behind Ron was a bottomless cliff. Unless he could fly, he would not survive if he fell. Of course, Joss would not let him go so easily. Cough. Ron spat out a mouthful of blood. He stared calmly at Joss and smiled sadly. There's one thing I don't understand. Why do you keep targeting me? It doesn't matter if you know. Joss paused. You may have forgotten that in the kingdom of Moran, I met Misty Lynn. That day, you were also there. To tell you the truth, I've fallen in love with her, Joss said calmly. But she didn't accept my love. Joss took a deep breath. I tried to solve the problem with magical beasts, but I couldn't beat her. After hearing this, Ron suddenly realized that the reason why Joss had been looking for trouble with him was because of D. Lynn. And from the looks of it, he not only fought with D. Lynn, but also suffered losses. After hearing this, Ron laughed loudly. More blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Ron stopped laughing and said calmly, D. Lynn is free to like whoever she wants. Joss, don't you think your behavior is too boring? But it's all because of you. D. Lynn actually said, she said that I can't compare with you at all. She also said that I'm not even worthy of carrying your shoes. Bah, who do you think you are? You want to compete with me? Joss scolded fiercely. You're just an ordinary human. What right do you have to love her? What right do you have to compete with me for her? Joss stared at Ron with his blood-red eyes, as if he wanted to eat him up. In the polar ice field, I saved you to prove that I'm stronger than you. But she can't see. At this moment, Joss looked crazy. He stepped on Ron, raised his hands high, and shouted hysterically, Tell me, in the whole Noah continent, who else is worthy of her except me? Who else? Who else? Joss' madness made Ron's heart tighten. At this time, Joss' cold eyes fell, and he stared at Ron with his blood-red eyes, which were full of murderous intent. It's you. It's all because of you. I lost the chance to win D. Lynn's heart. It's all because of you. Now, Ron, go to hell. Joss' eyes shone brightly. He ruthlessly moved his foot and heavily stepped on Ron. Boom! The mountain collapsed and the earth cracked. Joss exerted his strength in a frenzy, and the ground cracked. A huge sound was heard, and half of the rocks that extended out of the cliff fell down, and countless rocks rolled down the cliff. Joss' eyes were bloodshot, and he couldn't help but gasp for breath. Below his feet was the half-collapsed cliff. But where was Ron? Ron's figure was already missing under Joss' feet. At this time, behind Joss, a cloud of black fog quickly condensed and slowly condensed into the appearance of a human. At the last moment, Ron used the fog concealment spell to turn into a cloud of fog and quickly escaped. Then, he condensed again, but his appearance was very different from before. A pair of deep eyes, revealing a trace of evil taste, and a slightly childish face had been replaced by gloominess. "Grandpa Hamelin!" Ron exclaimed in his heart. His soul appeared in his sea of consciousness, and at this moment, the one controlling his body was Hamelin. Hamelin slightly smiled and said with a trace of reproach, "Ron, you're wrong. You knew you couldn't beat him, so why didn't you summon me earlier? You know, Grandpa has been waiting for you to summon me." But, Ron weakly said in a low voice, I was afraid. I was afraid that Grandpa's soul power would be used up too much, and he would fall into a deep sleep again. So, I didn't dare to disturb you." "Nonsense." Hamelin fiercely knocked Ron's head. "With your strength, if you meet such a strong opponent, you will definitely be killed in an instant. Yes, fighting will of course consume my soul power, but do you think that if you die, my soul will still exist?" "Yes, Grandpa Hamelin, I know I was wrong." Ron replied in fear and trepidation. "It's good that you know you were wrong." Hamelin smiled with satisfaction, and then his smile disappeared, and his cold eyes swept to Joss, who was not far away. "Leave this magical beast to me." On top of Will Volcano, Ron and Joss quietly confronted each other. Facing Ron, Joss had a rare, dignified look. His red cloak fluttered without wind, and his claw-like hands gently pinched, and a lightning power covered his whole body. Ron could not help but sneer. Black fog surrounded his body, and in terms of momentum, he was not weaker than the other party. "You are not Ron. Who are you?" Joss asked in a deep voice. He could see at a glance that this Ron in front of him was different from before. Whether it was his demeanor, strength, or temperament, it was as if he had changed into another person. "You don't need to know." Ron spoke with an old and hoarse voice. He took out the dragon bone staff from the space bag, pointed it forward, and waved it at Joss, and smiled. "Don't talk nonsense. No matter what, I will defeat you. Come, I need a high-level duel between the two of you." "Bastard." Faced with Ron's provocation, Joss was finally enraged. "Ron, don't think that you can be arrogant just because you changed your soul body. Compared to my strength, there is a gap. No matter who you are, what's your origin, I, Dragon Eagle Joss, will trample you under my feet. Come on." Ron's eyes burned with a strong fighting spirit. At this time, Joss moved, and he pounced on Ron like a fierce tiger. Ron smiled coldly, and his fingers, which were like chicken claws, gently formed a spell and whispered a chant. Boom, boom, boom. The two of them started an earth-shattering battle at the top of Will Volcano. Countless snowflakes fluttered, and when they fell, they turned into snow, water, and disappeared in the air. The earth trembled slightly, and a purple arc kept spreading in all directions. In the magic crystal ball, it could be clearly seen that the two forces were entangled with each other, and neither was giving way to the other. Powerful forces exploded like fireworks, and even in the crystal ball, the powerful forces of the two sides could be clearly felt. Everyone was dumbfounded. All of this was too unexpected. The human contestant, who did not even have the strength of the sacred domain, could actually compete with a level 15 Dragon Eagle. Bellis rubbed her eyes, and they were full of shock. What is going on? Ronnie, isn't he a master-level expert? How can he be so powerful? Chapter 511. At this moment, Joss had already reverted to his original form. A huge dragonhawk was soaring in the sky. He spread his huge golden wings, his long tail swaying in the wind. His eagle-like gaze was overlooking everything in the world. Looking at Ron, Joss' eyes seemed to be spitting fire. He roared loudly. Fury of thunder. The lightning element in the air suddenly gathered, forming a thundercloud in the sky. In an instant, countless bolts of lightning fell like raindrops, shaking the heavens and the earth. Boom, boom, boom. The lightning struck the mountain peak, causing a violent tremor. Joss' attack had actually caused an avalanche. Insignificant skill. Facing his opponent's overwhelming attack, Hamelin sneered. He did not choose to use the same power to fight against Joss. That would be an extremely foolish move. He made a grabbing motion in his hand, condensing a white ball of light. The white ball of light floated quietly in his palm, constantly rotating. Ron's black robe fluttered without wind. His entire person was filled with a strange aura, and the dragonbone staff in his hand shone brightly. After condensing his power, he casually threw the white ball of light in his hand. The white ball of light was like a white silk swimming towards Joss. It was as nimble as a fish shuttling through the lightning. "Grandfather, what is this?" Ron asked curiously, his eyes wide open as he looked at the white silk. This was a necromancy spell he had never seen before. Whitebone's soul. Hamelin smiled. This is an offensive necromancy spell. It mainly attacks the opponent's soul. If it's light, the soul will be severely injured. If it's heavy, the person will directly lose consciousness. Hamelin patiently explained. He would not let go of any opportunity to teach Ron. This is Joss frowned. He saw a white ball of air rapidly approaching him. It was constantly twisting and turning like a snake, narrowly avoiding all the lightning attacks and heading straight for him. Joss immediately dodged, but the white ball of air seemed to have a mind of its own, following him like a shadow. Boom! The white ball of air hit Joss. Joss suddenly felt as if he had been struck by lightning. This is a soul attack. By the time Joss realized what had happened, it was already too late. The weakest part of the human body was the soul, and magical beasts were no exception. In an instant, his soul suffered a heavy blow. Joss felt a piercing pain in his head, and his soul in his sea of consciousness let out a painful howl. Jose also screamed in the air. How is that possible? That Ron. Isn't he a master-level expert? The elder of the Water Dragon clan was flabbergasted. He actually fought with a 15-level magical beast to such an extent. Moreover, he has the upper hand. That guy hid his strength. An elder said in a deep voice, "This guy is too treacherous." Another elder was dissatisfied with Ron's actions, deliberately hiding his strength. A human like this, no matter how strong he is, has no right to join the dragons. But that's not a prerequisite, said one of the dragons beside him. He retorted. At this moment, Belize had already calmed down. Her beautiful eyes stared quietly at the magic crystal ball, and a trace of gratification flashed through her eyes. Lord Patriarch, what do you think of this matter? At this time, Colorado quietly approached Lawfirth and called out, reminding him that the current situation was out of his control. He rubbed his hands, and his expression was somewhat anxious. Don't worry, keep watching. Lawfirth smiled and said indifferently. He looked at Ron's figure in the crystal ball, and a look of appreciation appeared in his eyes. At this moment, the battle on Will Volcano was reaching its climax, and the Grand Magus Necromancer Hamelin, who was controlling Ron's body, had already gained the upper hand. He attacked continuously, and the soul and physical attacks intertwined, suppressing Joss to the point that he couldn't breathe. It was no wonder that Joss was facing a power that he had never seen before and had never even heard of. This kind of power only existed in legends. How is that possible? How is that possible? Joss, who was being beaten back bit by bit, had a look of disbelief on his face. His opponent's strength was actually so strong that he wasn't the slightest bit weaker than him. At the same time, his fighting style was strange and shrewd. He felt that his attacking style was completely seen through, and as long as he moved his body, his opponent would immediately react. His opponent's rich battle experience far exceeded his imagination. The most frightening thing was that those mysterious techniques with negative effects were actually devouring his strength, and even his movements were slowing down. Powerful, too powerful. Ron exclaimed in admiration as he observed the situation with his soul. It turned out that necromancy magic could be used in such a way. Merlin didn't seem to be at a disadvantage even when facing opponents of the same level with his superb fighting skills. Grandpa Hamelin, your strength seems to be weaker than his. How can you beat him to this state? Ron couldn't help but ask after watching for a while. Hee, Ron, you've hit the nail on the head. Hamelin smiled as he looked into the distance. This question involves many aspects, including strategy, tactics, psychology, the degree of use of strength, battle experience, and so on. When the difference in strength isn't too great, These things will determine the outcome of a battle, Homelin explained patiently. Looks like the outcome is about to be decided. Lawfirth watched quietly with a faint smile on his face. This human is completely out of my expectations. Back then, he was the one who killed the sacred domain powerhouse of the Holy See. I'm afraid his origin isn't that simple. If Lawfirth was prejudiced against Ron a moment ago, he was now full of admiration. A trace of unwillingness flashed in Colorado's eyes. It was the feeling of a complete failure. Joss was his friend and also a candidate he recommended to participate in the Foreign Dragons assessment. He spared no effort in helping Joss, but in the end, he still failed. Ron defeated Joss and became a Foreign Dragons was already set in stone. Sir Patriarch, this kid used heresy, Colorado reminded in a low voice. Can a person like him be used by us dragons? Colorado also used the word heresy at this moment. He was unwilling to accept everything that Ron had obtained. Heresy? Heresy? Lawfirth frowned and said with a faint smile, a good sword can kill others and also kill oneself. The difference is whose hand is holding the hilt of the sword. So, Sir Patriarch is willing to lift the killing order on him in the meeting? Colorado asked. Yes, Lawfirth said confidently, as long as he's willing to join us dragons. Colorado thought for a while and made a final effort. That dragon eagle is also a level 15 magical beast. Should we consider giving him another place? No. Lawfirth shook his head and refused. There can only be one winner. There can only be one winner. Colorado carefully thought over Lawfirth's words. He quickly understood his intention. He sighed in his heart, nodded gently, and silently retreated. Joss, this is all I can help you. Colorado looked at Joss in the magic crystal ball and sighed in his heart. This boy's power is a bit strange. At this moment, Lawfirth said to himself. His eyes showed a thoughtful look, but his power is also what we need. At the peak of Will Volcano, there was a mess everywhere. The towering hall was destroyed beyond recognition. The snow was scorched black. Countless gravel rolled down from the peak. At this time, the peak began to tremble violently. Boom! There was an earth-shattering sound, and the top of a volcano had completely split open. Blazing magma rushed into the sky from the gap, and a large amount of dust swept across the sky. In an instant, the sky became dark. Due to the influence of the two powerful forces, Will Volcano erupted. In the sky above the Will Volcano, Joss and Ron were quietly confronting each other. The raging flames reflected their faces red. Joss, who had transformed into a dragonhawk, was covered with blue lightning, constantly making crackling sounds. The hawk's face became distorted, and it could be seen that his heart was filled with anger. On the other hand, the Ron opposite him had a calm and unruffled appearance. He smiled slightly, his body surrounded by black mist, and the sacred artifact in his hand emitted a faint light in the black mist. Facing Ron, Joss was almost crazy. At this moment, he was trembling. He could not tolerate the fact that he, who was noble and had the blood of dragons, was defeated by a human. I'm going to kill you. Suddenly, Joss hysterically roared. Suddenly, his strength increased by another level. Then, he let out a clear cry like an eagle. His golden wings flapped, and a gust of wind rose. He madly rushed toward Ron, leaving a series of dazzling lightning in the space he passed. Grandpa Homelin, be careful. He's rushing over again. Ron reminded. Don't worry, it's just a dying struggle. Facing Joss' attack, Homelin laughed heartily. That magical beast has already lost its mind. It's only a matter of time before it loses. Homelin's right hand made a grabbing motion, and a strong light flashed in his eyes. Weaken. The curse Weaken was cast. Without any warning, Joss felt his body sink, as if he could not use his strength. He was shocked. What's going on? At this moment, Homelin's attack had arrived. He clenched his hands together, and a green cyclone slowly formed. The green cyclone emitted a faint light, illuminating Ron's face. At this moment, his face was full of malevolence. Death Coil! Before Joss could react, death coil had already fiercely hit his body. Boom! With a loud sound, the green fog filled the air and engulfed the dragon eagle. Chapter 512. Silence. There was complete silence. In the meeting room of the dragons, everyone was stunned. They stood up and stared at the magic crystal ball, their eyes filled with disbelief. Finally, the winner has been decided. Seeing this result, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. It had to be said that this result was completely unexpected to them. No one would have thought that a level 15 magical beast with part of the dragon's bloodline would lose to a human in the final battle. They also didn't expect that human to have hidden so much strength. Ron finally won. Bella's eyes were filled with tears. She quietly hid in a dark corner and gently wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes when no one was paying attention. Who is he? Frigga looked at Ron in the magic crystal ball. The familiar feeling was getting stronger and stronger. On top of Will Volcano, Homelin slowly descended and said to Ron's soul in his sea of consciousness, "Ron, he has no ability to resist. You can do whatever you want with him." After saying that, he slowly withdrew from Ron's body and returned the control of Ron's body to him. Joss's body was extremely weak. At this moment, he had already returned to his human form. The power of the curse was still wreaking havoc in his body. He was so weak that he couldn't even lift a finger. Joss's eyes were fixed on Ron. Anger, unwillingness, jealousy, all kinds of emotions appeared on his face. At this moment, his heart was filled with all kinds of feelings. The third round of the Foreign Dragon's examination had come to an end. "Thank you, Grandpa Homelin." Ron's heart was filled with gratitude. However, he didn't show it on his face. Instead, he kept it in his heart. With all the obstacles cleared, the Foreign Dragons were none other than Ron. Looking at the ruined hall in front of him, Ron sighed in his heart. "You? Who are you?" At this moment, Joss's unreconciled voice came from behind him. "I'm a Grand Magus Necromancer, Ron." Ron said softly and didn't pay any more attention to Joss. He didn't even look back at the underground mountain. At this moment, in the meeting room of the dragons, the Patriarch pulled Firth up. "I don't think the result needs to be discussed anymore. Now, let's welcome a new partner." Firth narrowed his eyes slightly and looked down at the audience. Everyone was silent. This examination was fair and reasonable. In the face of such a result, no one had anything to say. Water Dragon Elder coughed. "I think we should hold a grand welcome ceremony for this new powerhouse." "Yes, that's right." The other elders echoed in agreement. Bellis didn't speak. Her face was filled with calmness, but her heart was thumping. Ron had passed the Foreign Dragon's examination. This meant that from now on, she could see her son whenever she wanted. This was a true mother and son reunion, although the ending wasn't perfect. Ever since Ron participated in the Foreign Dragon's examination, Bellis had been hiding it very well. No one could see her relationship with Ron. Even when she personally helped Ron in the second round of the examination, she was still very careful and didn't reveal any flaws. Ron could join the dragons as a human. This hadn't happened for a long time in the history of dragons. All of this was due to his hard work. Although Bellis didn't understand how her son defeated that level 15 magical beast. Fortunately, the powerful and confident dragons never doubted these things. They only believed in strength in their own eyes. Ron walked down the Will Volcano. Due to the avalanche caused by his fierce battle with Joss, the road was covered with thick snow. It was very difficult to walk. Ron was considering whether to summon the gargoyle to fly down the mountain. At this time, Ron looked up slightly and saw that the middle-aged man was standing in front of him. "Ron, I'm here to pick you up. Please sit on my back," the middle-aged man said. His voice was so calm that it didn't have a trace of fluctuation. As soon as his voice fell, his body immediately changed. His body emitted a strong blue light, as if something was stretching out. After a while, a huge blue dragon appeared in front of Ron. The flying dragon of the sacred domain. "Come on up." The blue dragon spoke in human language and waved its huge wings. Ron nodded. He jumped lightly and landed steadily on the back of the blue dragon. The blue dragon let out a clear cry. It kicked its legs, flapped its wings, and soared into the sky. In the sky, white clouds were everywhere. The whistling cold wind swept past Ron's ears. Looking down from above, the earth was green. "Where are we going now?" Ron asked. "The dragon's elders' meeting room." After saying this, the blue dragon fell silent. No matter what Ron asked, he kept silent. Ron asked a few questions. After getting no answer, he could only shut his mouth resentfully. The dragons were worthy of being the overlords of the sky. They flew very fast. In terms of aerial combat, even the powerful Beaumont was no match for them. "We're here," the blue dragon said. After a while, they appeared in the sky above a mountain and began to slowly descend. In front of Ron's eyes was a huge palace-like building. At the entrance of the huge palace, there were two dragons with their wings spread out. It looked very majestic. Outside the palace, there were already hundreds of dragonhawks in the sky. They were constantly circling in the air, looking at this new human who had joined the dragons. Their eyes were filled with jealousy. Even the semi-dragon with a bloodline of dragons might not be looked at by the proud dragons. They only followed the orders of the dragons, but did not join the dragons. When they saw this human join the dragons, they began to whisper, "How is this possible? The foreign dragon this time is actually a human?" A dragonhawk said, "Isn't it the legendary level 15 dragonhawk?" Another dragonhawk asked. "He defeated the dragonhawk. Heavens, how is this possible? How can he be a match for that powerful level 15 dragonhawk? I don't believe it, and I can't feel the power of a powerhouse from the sacred domain from him." A dragonhawk at the side was surprised. "It doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. What matters is that the elders believe it." At this moment, the blue dragon had landed steadily on the ground. Ron jumped off the dragon's back. At this time, the blue dragon once again transformed into the appearance of the middle-aged man. "Go in." The middle-aged man gestured for him to enter. Ron nodded and followed the middle-aged man into the hall. "Attention! Salute!" On both sides of the palace gate, there were two rows of humans riding dragonhawks. They were the Dragon Knights of Dragon Island. They wore the same uniform of white armor that sparkled under the sun. At this moment, they had already jumped off the back of the dragonhawks and stood beside the dragonhawks with their swords raised high. They had a murderous look on their faces. Those with weak mental fortitude would be trembling in fear. Looking at the Dragon Knights, a rare smile finally appeared on the middle-aged man's face. He took the initiative to introduce them to Ron. "They are my subordinates from the Roland Empire's Soaring Dragon Academy." Soaring Dragon Academy? Ron was slightly surprised. "Yes, it's right next to your alma mater, the Balarax Academy," the middle-aged man said. Ron took a deep breath. He knew that the dragons had already figured out his background, but then he remembered that he was a dragon and immediately felt relieved. If the dragons couldn't even figure out the background of a human, then they didn't deserve to be called the strongest race in the continent of Noah. But fortunately, the dragons didn't know about his relationship with Bellis. Ron was prepared to keep this a secret forever. Just like the Dragonhawks, when the Dragon Knights saw that the foreign dragons were actually a human, their faces were full of shock, which then turned into deep jealousy. Although they were very surprised, they still maintained good discipline. It could be seen that they were well trained. The dark gate slowly opened, and Ron strode into the meeting room of the dragons with his head held high. In an instant, dozens of eyes shot towards him like sharp swords. Among them, every one of them was a powerhouse of the sacred domain or even a powerhouse of the divine realm. When these people saw Ron, they let out a soft cry. They were all surprised at how young Ron was, but some of them didn't understand how someone of his strength could defeat a level 15 magical beast. The meeting room was filled with a powerful aura. It couldn't be ruled out that some people took the opportunity to exert great pressure. Ron hadn't joined the dragons yet, but the Sacred Domain dragons couldn't wait to show him their strength. Among the many elders of the dragons, Ron saw his mother at a glance, the black dragon Elder Bellis. At this moment, she was looking at him with a concerned gaze, making him feel warm in his heart. Even his courage was boosted, and he calmly met those malicious gazes. "You are Ron." Lawford's majestic voice echoed in the hall, interrupting Ron's thoughts. On the high throne sat an old man. Needless to say, he was the patriarch of the dragons, the dark dragon Lawfirth. According to seniority, he was Ron's grandfather, his biological grandfather. Ron looked at Lawfirth. Although he knew that this was his grandfather, he still didn't have a good impression of him. Ron stood in the center of the hall, took a deep breath, and looked at the audience with a confident gaze. He said in a clear voice, "Yes, I am Ron." The moment he saw Ron, Lawfirth suddenly felt a strange feeling in his heart. Strong, confident, and with a hint of arrogance, he was very much like him when he was young. This feeling made Lawfirth feel unusually close, and his tense expression also eased. With a smile on his face, Lawfirth slowly said, "Ron, congratulations on successfully passing the 3 tests of the Foreign Dragons. During the process of the tests, no inappropriate behavior was found, so the tests are considered valid. Now, let me ask you, are you willing to join the dragons, become a member of the dragons, work for the dragons, and share the hardships and glory of the dragons?" Lawfirth's voice echoed in the hall, making people feel incomparably majestic. Everyone listened and quietly watched Ron's performance. Faced with Lawfirth's question, Ron didn't directly answer. Instead, he bowed deeply. "Elders of the dragons, before joining the dragons, Ron has something to say." "Speak," Lawfirth said faintly. "Although I don't want to say it, I have to tell the dragons' elders frankly." Ron raised his head. "The Ron in front of you is an ominous human. He has been ruled as a heretic by the council and has been issued a kill order." Ron's gaze swept across everyone's faces and calmly said, "Perhaps Ron joining the dragons will bring a lot of trouble to the dragons." Kill order from the council? All the elders were shocked. For many of them, it was the first time they knew that Ron had such a complicated past. This guy, Colorado's eyes flashed. He naturally understood Ron's intentions, because the 2 leaders of the Noah Continent's Council were sitting in front of him. However, Ron's frankness and neither servile nor overbearing attitude won the favor of many elders. They turned their eyes to Lawfirth and Frigga. These 2 were the chairman and vice chairman of the council. This matter had a lot to do with them. Firth already knew Ron's identity and details, so he smiled. We dragons are not afraid of those troubles. As a member of the dragons, we dragons will naturally give you enough protection. You can rest assured about this." After saying that, he turned to Frigga and said, "Frigga, what do you say?" He asked Frigga, the chairman of the Noah Continent's Council. As long as she nodded, coupled with his support as the vice chairman, the killing order was not worth mentioning at all. Frigga did not answer Firth's question. From a moment Ron stepped into the main entrance of the hall, the uneasiness in her heart became more and more intense. She felt that Ron was very similar to a person, and this person was the person she was most familiar with. At this time, Frigga only felt a flash of light in her mind. She seemed to see the shadow of Ron in front of her overlapping with a person's shadow. It was clearly displayed. "Ah!" Frigga suddenly screamed, startling everyone and causing them to look at her. Firth looked at Frigga with a somewhat dissatisfied expression. "Frigga, you are the chairman of the council and also the vice chief of the dragons. You should always pay attention to your identity and image. Why are you so surprised?" Yes, I. Frigga answered submissively. Her heart had already been set off by stormy waves. "Yes, Bellis, this human youth, looks very similar to Aunt Bellis. Regardless of appearance or temperament, his age is also about the same. That's right. His true identity is..." Not getting any response from Frigga, Firth's face flashed with a trace of displeasure. He turned to Ron and asked pleasantly, "Ron, are you willing to join the dragons?" "I'm willing." Ron saw that the conditions were right, and his heart was filled with joy as he said loudly. The big stone in Bella's heart finally fell to the ground. She finally could not help but reveal the excited expression on her face, and a trace of tears unconsciously appeared in the corner of her eyes. "Congratulations. Welcome, Ron, as a human joining the dragons." The elders of the dragons smiled and congratulated Ron one after another. At this time, a thunderous voice suddenly came from the sky. Chapter 5:13. This voice is... Ron's expression suddenly changed because he recognized the owner of the voice. Boom! A huge hole was smashed open in the ceiling of the hall. A huge figure descended from the sky with a powerful momentum and swooped down. It was a fiery red flying dragon. Its wings were more than 10 meters long, and its whole body was surrounded by a fiery aura. Its huge limbs stepped on the stone floor, and deep cracks appeared on the stone floor. The fiery flying dragon spread its wings and let out a long hiss. Then its body began to change. Its huge body turned into flames, and at the same time, it began to shrink. Not long after, it turned into the shape of a human. It was a young man in his 20s. That flying dragon was Ranarier of the Flame Dragon tribe, the leader of the new generation of dragons. At this moment, he had already appeared in the hall. It's him. How did he escape from the city of zombies? Suddenly seeing Ranarier, Ron's hands and feet turned cold. His heart sank. Bellis did not think of this. She only felt strange about Ranarier's sudden appearance. At this time, a middle-aged dragon stood up and said unhappily, Ranarier, where have you been these days? You didn't even attend the meeting. Also, what are you doing here? This is none of your business. Firth sat quietly without any expression. He was guessing the purpose of Ranarier's appearance. Ranarier got down on one knee. Sir Patriarch, Ron must not join the dragons. Why? Firth's voice was calm, without a trace of fluctuation. He slightly raised his head and said, Give me a reasonable reason. That's because... Ranarier glanced at Ron, gritted his teeth, and finally made up his mind. That's because Ron is a disgrace to us dragons. He is the bastard born from the union of Black Dragon Elder Bellis and a human. What? Ranarier's words were no less than dropping a heavy bomb in the dragon's hall. Everyone was shocked. Their mouths were wide open, and their eyes were full of disbelief. Some people stood up, forgetting their manners. What's going on? At this moment, Ron's mind went blank. He felt like he was being stripped naked in public. At the same time, his body trembled violently. Bellis shut her eyes abruptly, hot tears rolling down her cheeks. Ranarier. Firth squeezed the words out of his mouth with difficulty. His eyes narrowed slightly as he stared at Ranarier, quietly with a murderous look in his eyes. Although I think highly of you, at the same time, let me tell you that there is a limit to my patience. Colorado also said with a sullen face, Read pornographic novels. Nalai, pay attention to your status. You are talking to the Patriarch. Everyone in the hall felt Firth Ranarier's anger. There was a trace of suffocation in the air. Everyone knew that Bellis was Firth Ranarier's daughter. As the Patriarch of the Dragon's clan, his dignity had been challenged. Ranarier's father, the elder of the Fire Dragon clan, also stood up at this moment. He frowned and said, Ranarier, my son, you can't speak carelessly. Quickly apologized to the Patriarch. As a father, he also felt that his son had gone too far, so he had to stand up and make peace. At this moment, traces of black energy emerged from Firth Ranarier's body. The power of a god's realm expert enveloped the entire hall, causing everyone to be unable to breathe. Everyone quietly looked at Ranarier, waiting to see how he would deal with this situation. Facing Firth Ranarier's anger, Ranarier could not help but feel apprehensive. When he saw Frigga, his courage was boosted. He gritted his teeth, stood up, and said loudly, Patriarch, Father, I didn't say anything wrong. What I said was completely the truth. Ha, Ron. Ranarier sneered as he pointed at Ron and said, Let me tell everyone, this human isn't called Ron at all. He's called Moody. His father is a human. His mother is the Black Dragon clan's Elder Bellis. Silence. The hall was deathly silent. Everyone was stunned. The air seemed to have frozen. Even the sound of a needle falling to the ground could be heard. Ranarier, at this moment, Firth Ranarier finally broke the silence. He slowly stood up. There was not a trace of anger on his face. Patriarch. Ranarier was forced to take a step back by Firth Ranarier's aura. At this moment, a trace of fear finally appeared on his face. Suddenly, Ranarier's father, the elder of the Fire Dragon clan, suddenly cried out. Patriarch, don't. What? Ranerier was shocked. It was too late to say it. At this moment, Ranerier only felt a blur in front of his eyes. He only saw that his face had suffered a heavy blow. His entire body flew out like a cloud. Boom! With a loud sound, Ranier's body hit the wall of the hall. A large hole appeared on the wall from the impact. It could be seen how heavy the palm was. Cough, cough, cough. Ranerier pushed away the stones on his body and climbed up in a sorry state. His face was swollen, and a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Patriarch, Ranelli's father, let out a sigh of relief. It seemed that the Lord Patriarch had already shown mercy. Firth Ranerier stood in the middle of the hall. Everyone was intimidated by his power and did not speak. After Firth Ranerier taught this arrogant Ranerier a lesson, he slowly turned his head and stared at his daughter. He coldly asked, "Is this true?" Beatrice painfully closed her eyes and slowly nodded. Firth Ranerier calmly continued to ask, "You already knew?" "Yes." Beatrice nodded again and said, since things had come to this, she might as well confess. Firth Ranier's body trembled violently. He was so angry that he laughed. "Good, very good. You are indeed my good daughter." At this moment, his gaze slowly turned and stared at Ron. "You are Moody?" At this moment, Ron also calmed down. Since his identity had been exposed, there was no need to hide anymore. He slowly raised his head and calmly looked into Firth Ranier's eyes. "Yes, but my name is not Moody. My name is Ron." Ron's words had already admitted his identity. At this moment, the surrounding dragons' faces became strange. Some were secretly laughing, some were gloating. There was only one noble dragon who actually married a lowly human. However, this was the first time in the history of dragons that they coveted a human's offspring. It can't be right. Elder Bellice actually married a human. Why didn't I know? And she even gave birth to a son. This matter has long been an open secret. It's just that the Patriarch did not allow it to be said. So the rumors are true. The elders were whispering. They looked at Ron from time to time, their eyes full of ridicule. Frigga quietly looked at Ron with a complicated expression. She had always thought that Moody was dead. She had always used Aunt Beatrice's joke as a shield to reject all the dragon suitors. However, now she felt like she had shot herself in the foot. Moody was actually standing in front of her alive. Although he had changed his name, Frigga did not know how to end the situation. "Ron. Very good, you are Ron." Firth Ranerier looked Ron up and down. "When you were a baby, I personally threw you down from a height of 6,000 meters. Ranier's words rang in Ron's ears. They were so calm that there was not a trace of ripple, as if they were talking about something unimportant. "But I didn't expect that you were actually still alive. It seems that you are indeed very lucky. It was my grandfather who saved me and raised me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing here today." Ron tried to keep his face calm, but there were huge waves in his heart. His eyes were fixed on Ranerier, Firth Ranerier, and his fists were already clenching little by little. Ranerier, Firth Ranerier nodded and said, "I didn't misjudge you, Ron. As a human, you are indeed very outstanding, but you are only human. But your existence to us dragons is a disgrace. We dragons will never accept the existence of a human descendant." Ranerier, Firth Ranerier, raised a finger. He raised his voice and said firmly, "You fought for the identity of a foreign dragon yourself. I can give it to you, but..." At this point, Ranerier, Firth Ranerier paused. He took a deep breath, and his voice was emotionless. "You can end it yourself. This matter ends here." After Ranerier, Firth Ranerier finished speaking, he gently exhaled. He thought that this was already a great gift to Ron. "No!" Bella screamed shrilly. She quickly threw herself in front of Ron and hugged him tightly in her arms. "He is my son. Father, you can't do this." "Shut up." Ranerier, Firth Ranerier, glared at her. "Bellis, I have put you under house arrest at Black Dragon Cliff all these years. I was hoping that you would reflect on yourself, but you are still stubborn. Look at him." Ranerier, Firth Ranerier pointed at Ron and shouted, "This human. What part of him is worthy of being the descendant of us dragons? Looking at Ron's face that was as white as Bellis, Firth Ranerier could not help but curse fiercely. Damn it, I should have thought of it earlier. Ron's heart rose and fell violently. His heart was already filled with anger. You can insult me, but you can't insult my mother. With that, he took a step forward, stared at Firth Ranerier, and said, I don't care about the identity of foreign dragon. I want to take my mother away. In your dreams, Firth Ranerier sneered. You are not qualified to bargain with me. Firth Ranerier stared at Bellis, and a trace of murderous intent appeared in his eyes. Bellis, get out of the way. Since he doesn't want to do it himself, then I will end him myself. No, Bellis shouted. He is my son. I don't care what others think of me, but Ron is my son. No one can hurt him. At this moment, she was crying her eyes out. Frigga Ranerier had been hesitating, but seeing this situation, she could not help but stand up. Lord Chief, shut up. Firth Ranerier turned around with bloodshot eyes, stared at Frigga's face, and said sternly, This is a family matter of our Black Dragons. Although you're the deputy chief of the Black Dragon clan, it is not up to you to intervene in this matter. Frigga Ranier's lips moved a few times. She wanted to say something, but in the end, she did not say anything. She sat down weakly. Chapter 514. Lawfirth made up his mind and decided to clean up the mess himself. A black light flashed in his eyes, and with a whoosh, he punched out casually. No, not knowing where her courage came from, Bellis pushed Ron away and stood in front of Ron. A black ray of light rose up and spread out in all directions like an arc. The powerful Black Dragon clan had actually used their true power. The earth shook and the mountains shook. In the surging power, the dust in the hall fell down. Everyone in the hall dodged in panic. After all, a fight between two adult black dragons was not a joke. Bellis, get out of the way. Lawfirth stopped attacking and said in a low voice. He really did not want to fight with his daughter. No, I will never let you hurt Ron. Although she knew that she could not beat her father, Bellis firmly did not take a step back. She wanted to protect Ron's safety. At this time, she suddenly turned her head. Ron, go. No. Ron took out the dragon bone staff from the space bag with a determined expression. Mother, I will not leave alone. I want to take you with me. Looking at Ron's thin body and young face that was born malnourished, Bellis burst into tears. Don't worry about me. Go, my father, he will really kill you. Go to hell. Being looked at by the dragons as if they were watching a monkey show, Lawfirth's face was full of anger. He vented his anger on Ron. At this time, Lawfirth suddenly attacked. Before Bellis could react, she only felt a blur in front of her eyes. Lawfirth had disappeared. Be careful, Bellis exclaimed. Lawfirth's speed was so fast that she could not react at all. At this time, a huge shield that was as bright as white jade suddenly appeared on Ron's body and blocked in front of him. Boom! Lawfirth's iron fist bombarded the huge white shield, and a large amount of black flames burst out. While what? Not only was R.A. Firth surprised, but all the other dragons were also shocked. They saw that he, who only had the strength of a master, was actually able to block Firth's iron fist attack. All of this was too unbelievable. At this moment, Ron's eyes had turned into a strange, ghostly green. A cold smile hung on his face, and his expression and temperament had undergone a tremendous change. In the main hall, Firth and Ron were quietly facing each other. Firth could feel a thick and heavy power coming from the other side. Firth's strength had increased by several levels in an instant. Firth took a step back, and a dignified look flashed in his eyes. Hee. Ron laughed, his eyes full of mockery. The so-called dragons have actually reached the point where they have to kill their own grandchildren to maintain their bloodline. Should I say this is laughable or sad? Ron opened his mouth, but his voice was hoarse and old. This was not a voice that a 20-year-old child should have. It was clearly an old man. You're not Ron. Who are you? Firth thought for a moment and understood the reason. He asked in a deep voice. Ron only sneered and did not answer Firth's question. Colorado's mind flashed, and he exclaimed, It's him. He's the one who defeated Dragon Eagle Joss. When everyone heard this, they finally realized that a person who did not even seem to have reached the sanctuary realm could actually defeat the magical beast Dragonhawk. It turned out that there was actually another soul in his body. This person was the one who truly possessed the power of the sanctuary realm. That's right. The one who defeated that dragon eagle was me. Ron admitted this point. At the most critical moment, Homelin appeared again and occupied Ron's body. Ron knew that this was not the time to be stubborn, so he promptly communicated with Grandpa Homelin through his soul. Grandpa Homelin, can you defeat him? Ron asked quietly in his mind. No. Homelin's soul shook his head and replied, I'm not afraid of others, but this dragon's strength is too strong. Even at my peak, it's impossible for me to defeat him. Ron bit his lips. But I want to take my mother away. Homelin sighed. I'll try my best. Homelin's eyes quietly stared at Firth and slowly said, Your Excellency Firth, I've always believed that there's no difference in bloodline. Strength is the only criterion. Your Excellency refuses to acknowledge Ron's identity because he's a human. I don't agree with this. Your Excellency, who are you? What's your purpose in coming to the dragons? Knowing that Merlin was at the peak of the Saint Realm, the elder of the Water Dragon clan became cautious. He gently waved his hand, and the members of the Water Dragon clan quietly surrounded Merlin. All the members of the Dragon clan had strong hostility in their eyes. Bellis's eyes also showed a nervous look. She was sure that this Ron in front of her was not her son, but she wanted to know what had happened to Ron. My name is Homelin. I was the lord of the undead temple of the Scourge Church 100,000 years ago. I'm also Ron's mentor. I taught him necromancy magic. Your Excellency Bellis, you can rest assured that I have no ill intentions towards Ron. Homelin briefly introduced himself, but the last sentence was for Bellis. Knowing that the person in front of her was Ron's mentor, Bellis was slightly relieved. 100,000 years ago, the Scourge Church? Firth's eyes flashed, and his face gradually became gloomy. Your Excellency actually came from the Amros continent 100,000 years ago. Homelin's eyes flashed with surprise. Your Excellency actually knows about the Scourge Church? You know about the Amros continent? Haha, that's too surprising. Homelin laughed. I've heard a little about it. The Amros continent is the predecessor of the Noah continent. As for the Scourge Church, Firth snorted coldly. It's just a human force that has been destroyed. It's no big deal. Cut the crap. What's your purpose for coming here? Raphael asked sternly. I only have one purpose for appearing on Ron. Homelin smiled faintly and pointed at Bellis. That is to take away his mother. Impossible. The furious Firth cursed fiercely, and a strong murderous intent flashed in his eyes. Homelin's request had crossed his bottom line. Then, Homelin smiled. I have no choice but to offend you. Kill him. At Firth's command, all the dragons in the hall moved. They pounced on Homelin like wolves and tigers. Their huge dragon's claws flashed with a cold light. Even in their human forms, these powerful dragons still had unparalleled strength. Any one of them could tear Ron into two. Homelin sneered. His body turned into a puff of smoke and instantly disappeared from a spot. Come, let me see the true strength of you dragons. With a long laugh, Homalian's figure flew out of the hall. His speed was so fast that even the Dragon clan was shocked. Charge and kill him. How dare you come to the Dragon Island to cause trouble? Kill. Kill. Now the situation had changed. When Homelin appeared on Ron's body, this was no longer a family matter of the Black Dragons. This was a provocation to all the Black Dragons. All the dragons roared. Their eyes turned blood red as they chased after him. At the same time, they began to transform. One after another, wyverns flew into the sky. In an instant, dozens of wyverns appeared around Homelin. They surrounded him from all directions. You want to fight me with numbers? Let me tell you, us necromancers are not afraid of being surrounded. Facing the encirclement of many wyverns, Homelin remained calm. He had a smile on his face and did not put those wyverns in his eyes. The elder of the Water Dragon clan had turned into a blue flying dragon. He flapped his huge wings and said coldly, Human, you must pay for your arrogance with your life. Then give it a try. Homeland's eyes burned with a strong fighting spirit. Roar! At this time, the water dragon elder roared and flew over. He opened his mouth and spat out an ice pillar. A bone-piercing cold air rushed over. Homeland's eyes turned green. He waved the dragon bone staff, and a black mist rose from his body. White bone shield. The white bone shield blocked the water dragon elder's ice pillar. At the same time, Homeland waved his staff and launched death coil to counterattack. At this time, the other dragons quickly pounced and fought with Homeland. More than 20 adult wyverns, as well as the dragonhawks that had rushed over after hearing the news, covered the sky in darkness. Countless spells rained down on Homeland like mercury, but Homeland didn't show the slightest hint of fear despite facing 100 enemies alone. Firth did not move. He respected his status. The other party was only a powerhouse of the sacred domain. It was not worthy of him to make a move. Moreover, he was a little afraid of Homeland's strange ability. He wanted to test the other party's strength first. Facing the siege of hundreds of dragons, Homeland seemed to be at ease. As he said, necromancers were not afraid of being surrounded. Frost Nova, weaken, death coil, bone cage. Frost Nova could cause huge frost damage to the opponent and slow down their speed. Weaken could reduce the opponent's strength. Death coil could attack the body and soul at the same time. Bone cage could seal the opponent's strength. One after another, strange and terrifying necromancy spells were released by Homeland. Black necromancy energy filled the entire sky. Whether it was the wyverns of the sacred domain or the master wyverns, their faces all changed. This terrifying power was chilling. Pornographic novels in the fierce battle above the Dragon Island, the powerful, experienced, and ruthless Merlin had completely gained the upper hand. At this moment, he unleashed his undead magic to its fullest. Some of the weaker pterodactyls fell to the ground after being hit by his magic. Go to hell. The elder of the water dragon tribe roared and summoned a high-level water spell, Blizzard. Ha ha ha. Homeland laughed. He flashed and appeared on the back of the water dragon elder. Holding the white bone spear that was as bright as white jade, he stabbed down, Gah. Chapter 5:15. Damn it. Seeing elder water dragon fall to the ground with serious injuries, R.A. Firth's eyes suddenly turned red. He roared and turned into a black dragon that rushed into the sky. No, don't. Bellis looked helplessly at the sky, tears streaming down her face. She seemed to have seen Ron's end. At this time, a figure appeared beside her. It was Frigga, Aunt Bellis. Frigga pulled her and whispered, "Is he really moody?" "Yes." Bellis nodded with tears in her eyes. Suddenly, she grabbed Frigga's arm. "Frigga, you must help me." Bellis's hand was tightly grasped, and her expression was full of anxiety. "Frigga, can you take him away? Or else take him away?" Hearing Bellis's request, Frigga's face was full of hesitation. It was not that she could not do it, but if she did so, it would be equivalent to publicly breaking off relations with R.A. Firth and even the entire dragons. "Frigga, only you can help me now, seeing that I've treated you as my daughter for so many years. I beg you." Bellis shook Frigga's arm, her tone full of pleading. "Aunt Bellis, I'm sorry." Frigga, who thought for a long time, finally made a decision. She bit her lower lip. I can't do it." Bellis was extremely disappointed, and she sat weakly on the ground. You're finally here. Can't help but make a move?" Homeland stood in the air, quietly confronting R.A. Firth, and said indifferently, "Stupid human, you will pay for your actions." R.A. Firth transformed into a dark dragon, floating in the air, and roared in a low voice. "People who provoke dragons will not have a good ending. Dragons?" A trace of mockery flashed through Homeland's eyes. He said in a clear voice, "In this world, no one is more noble than another." 100,000 years ago, the so-called giant dragons were nothing more than playthings in the hands of the experts of the Scourge Church. Don't think too highly of yourself, and don't think too highly of others. Of course, Homeland had his own reasons for saying so. After more than an hour of fighting, a large number of dragons had fallen. Of the 18 wyverns, 7 were seriously injured and 11 were lightly injured, including the Water Dragon clan's elder. Only an old monster like Hamelin, who had lived for more than 100,000 years, could do such a thing. His strength had already recovered to its peak. Ron admired Hamelin's grandfather even more. Hamelin's words completely enraged the dragons. They claimed to be the rulers of the Noah continent. When had they ever been provoked by a human? What an arrogant human! Kill him! Tear him into 1,000 pieces! The members of the dragons roared, but they did not dare to rush forward. The opponent's powerful strength and strange attack style made them feel cold. To a certain extent, these dragons were also fellows who bullied the weak and feared the strong. In the face of provocation, R.A. Firth was surprisingly calm. Necromancy is indeed not simple. Unfortunately, this is not the lost continent of Omros, and the Scourge Church has disappeared forever. Your past glory does not give you the right to be arrogant. Your Excellency Hamelin, do you agree with me? R.A. Firth said slowly. Hee. Hamelin laughed. At this moment, his eyes were full of fighting spirit. Then I'll let you see if I have the right to be arrogant. Huh. After saying that, his body suddenly burst out with a large amount of soul power, constantly spreading in all directions. His eyes turned a faint green. At the same time, Ron's face became ferocious. Blue veins popped out, twisting like snakes. I'll accompany you to the end. R.A. Firth was not to be outdone. He roared loudly, and the dark aura on his body surged. Immediately after, he turned into a huge flying dragon like the other members of the dragons. He opened his mouth and spat out a black dragon breath. The dark energy from the abyss was like a devil opening his eyes. A black flame with a strong corrosive aura blasted towards Hamelin. Good. Hamelin laughed, a trace of killing intent flashing in his eyes. Then I'll let you see the power of my undead. In an instant, the surroundings suddenly turned dark. A huge dark cloud covered the sky. The dark cloud grew bigger and bigger, blocking out all light. That was Hamelin's power, emitting a terrifying aura so strong that it was suffocating. This power. The bodies of the dragons trembled incessantly. They screamed and dodged one after another. There was no other reason than that this power was simply too terrifying. Boom! The dragon breath spat out by R.A. Firth cut into the dark cloud, like a drop of water entering the sea, disappearing without a trace. How can this be? R.A. Firth was shocked. The other party's power was far beyond his imagination. He fear, tremble. In front of the powerful undead power, all struggles are futile. Hamelin said loudly. At this time, the dark cloud began to change. A huge hand stretched out from the dark cloud. It was a right hand. According to legends, the left hand of God ruled life, and the right hand ruled death. The left hand was heaven, and the right hand was hell. It was a right hand from hell, emitting a strong aura of death. Death's hand. The huge hand grew bigger and bigger, grabbing towards Firth. In an instant, R.A. Firth's figure was firmly locked onto by the huge hand. Protection of darkness. R.A. Firth shouted. The power of darkness crazily surged. Not long after, a huge black ball of light appeared on his body, enveloping him inside. Boom! The huge black hand grabbed Firth's black ball of light. A powerful oppressive power burst out in an instant. The two forces collided, causing a loud bang. R.A. Firth's black ball of light was crushed and collapsed. Dragons are only SOSO. Hamelin sneered. His eyes shone brightly, and he suddenly increased the output of power. The huge hand squeezed downwards. R.A. Firth's black ball of light was constantly pressed down and fiercely crashed into the hall. For a moment, as if a disaster had occurred, the entire hall of the dragons began to collapse. Boom! 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 Like a gust of wind, countless stones flew everywhere, and all the trees in the surroundings were uprooted. The power of the undead spread out, as if the main peak of the dragons had suffered a destructive blow. Hand of Death. R.A. Firth was firmly grasped. His power of darkness was compressed to a pitiful extent. Facing Hamelin's terrifying power, he could only bitterly hold on. His body had already sunk into the ground. The huge hand that connected the sky and the earth firmly pressed him down under the mountain. Their patriarch was defeated. When they saw this scene, all the dragons could not help but tremble with fear. In their eyes, the high and mighty dragons could not be defeated. Moreover, their patriarch was a powerhouse of the divine realm, but it was actually defeated by a human. Was this a dream? If so, then let him wake up quickly. Ranarie's body had suffered heavy injuries. Seeing Homelin's terrifying power, he was secretly rejoicing. Fortunately, the other party had shown mercy at that time. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would not be standing here now. Looking at Firth being firmly suppressed, Ron's heart did not feel good. No matter what, R.A. Firth was still his biological grandfather. Father was actually defeated. She didn't understand how Hwum Merlin, a sacred magus, could defeat her father, who was a powerhouse of the god realm. At this time, Homelin's voice in the sky reached her ears. "Miss Bellis, what are you still standing there for? Why aren't you running?" Bellis was stunned for a moment. So this Ron's mentor had attacked to pull Firth away so that she could escape? "I promised Ron to save you and leave. Hurry, leave here." Homelin roared loudly. Leave? Bellis had never thought of this problem. If she wanted to leave, she could have left long ago, but Homelin seemed to understand what she was thinking and said loudly, "Miss Bellis, if you don't leave, Ron will be sad. Hurry up and leave. I can't hold on for much longer." Homelin's voice became hurried. Yes. Bellis finally reacted. She responded, and her body shot up like an arrow, flying out. Seeing Bellis's figure fly up, Ron heaved a sigh of relief. In his mind, he said gratefully to Homelin, "Grandpa Homelin, thank you." At this time, Homelin's face revealed a trace of a smile. "Ron, I've done what I promised you. Now let's escape." "Grandpa Homelin, haven't you already defeated Firth?" Ron asked curiously. "Why do we have to escape?" Homelin laughed bitterly. "Defeat him? It's easier said than done. Besides, there's still someone watching over there." Homelin was talking about Frigga. He had always been glad that Frigga hadn't interfered. Looking at the woman who claimed to be his fiancée, Ron couldn't help but frown. Just as Homelin's voice fell, a deep voice like muffled thunder came from underground. "Want to leave? It's not that easy." At this time, the ground began to shake violently. The shaking grew stronger and stronger, and a powerful dark energy seeped through the ground and rushed into the sky. Then, a powerful and extremely cold energy erupted from the ground, and even the space began to distort. It was an earth-shattering, peerless, ferocious power with a powerful, evil aura. Like a volcanic eruption, the ground began to crack. Homelin frowned, as if he had expected this to happen. He sighed slightly and shook his head gently. "It's still not working." The giant hand that connected the sky and the earth began to shake violently. It was the two forces fighting against each other. The terrifying power that came from underground couldn't even be withstood by Homelin, and the power began to dissipate. Boom! A huge head emerged from the ground. It was an incomparably huge monster. Then two huge claws stretched out, followed by its back. The wings on the monster's back blew up a gust of wind, causing sand and stones to fly. This monster was pitch black and covered in hard scales. There were 8 huge horns on its head, and a pair of cold eyes that were larger than a shield and filled with killing, intent stare at the sky. Everyone was shocked by the unprecedented power released by this monster. It was a wyvern. It also had 4 claws and a pair of large wings. However, this wyvern's body was much larger than all the wyverns that the wyverns had transformed into. It wasn't just 1 or 2 times larger. Instead, it was 10 times larger. His body stood halfway up the mountain, and the mountain became as small as a hillside. This is Lord Patriarch's true body. Corillaro took a step back in horror, and a terrifying thought flashed in his mind. Dark wyvern. Through his body, Ron stared blankly at the terrifying dark creature in front of him. His soul involuntarily trembled, and it was a fear that reached the bottom of his heart. The strongest creature among the dragons, the dark wyvern, R.A. Firth, finally revealed his terrifying true body. Roar. Chapter 516. What is this thing? Ron was dumbfounded. He didn't know that such a terrifying and powerful creature existed in this world. Black Dragon. Homeland's expression was solemn as he slowly said to Ron. Facing this terrifying giant beast, his heart sank. R.A. Firth's Black Dragon true body possessed the power of the God realm. This my body can't move. Bellis felt as if her body had been frozen, motionless in the air. It wasn't that she didn't want to move, but she couldn't. Good Father, the Black Dragon R.A. Firth had sealed the entire space. It's been a long time since I've been like this. To be honest, I'm not used to it. R.A. Firth muttered to himself. His blood-red eyes stared coldly at the sky. With a cold sneer, his huge wings unfolded. With a light flap, it was as if a gust of wind was blowing from the ground. His thick legs kicked off, and his huge body slowly rose into the air. R.A. Firth appeared in front of the black fog. A pair of huge dragon eyes quietly stared at Ron in the black fog. The difference in size between Ron and R.A. Firth's body was simply too great. Comparing the two, Ron was roughly the size of his head. R.A. Firth and the black fog in the sky stood facing each other in silence. The air seemed to have frozen, and the ground was deathly silent. Unexpectedly, I still underestimated you. At this time, R.A. Firth slowly opened his mouth. His huge eyes emitted a bone-chilling coldness. You're not at the peak of the sacred domain, but low-level God realm. Killing intent erupted from R.A. Firth's eyes. Low-level God realm. Hearing R.A. Firth's words, everyone was stunned. They looked at Homelin in disbelief. Only now did they understand why all the dragon's masters combined were no match for him. It turned out that he wasn't at the peak of the sacred domain, but a low-level God realm. In that case, their defeat wasn't unjustified. Low-level God realm. Ron was also shocked. As far as he knew, Homelin's grandfather's strength was indeed at the peak of the sacred domain, but why did he suddenly become a low-level God realm? The black fog in the sky gradually dissipated, revealing Ron's body. For some reason, his aura seemed to have dropped by a lot. R.A. Firth stared at Homelin's eyes as he said, but unfortunately, your low-level God realm strength is only a facade. You use some kind of secret method to forcibly raise your strength. I believe that everything there is a price, and now, perhaps now, it's time you pay the price. Price? Could it be? Ron jumped in fright hearing this. He immediately looked at Homelin's soul, only to see that Homelin's soul force had become incomparably weak, a world of difference compared to the sturdy feeling he had before. Ron's eyes widened in an instant. Soul ignition. For Ron's sake, Homelin actually burned his own soul, forcibly raising his strength. And now, the aftereffects of using soul ignition were finally revealed. Grandpa Homelin. Ron's tears gushed out of his eyes. Homelin didn't say anything, but his face twitched slightly. That's right, his purpose of using soul ignition was to delay Firth so that he could find a chance to escape. But all of his plans were shattered by R.A. Firth's Black Dragon incarnation. Now, do you have anything to say? R.A. Firth said slowly. Let's go. Homelin clenched his teeth. With a pung sound, Ron's body turned into a cloud of smoke. Like a nimble black spirit snake, he used the mist concealment technique to escape in an instant. Homelin knew that it was already impossible to escape with Ron's mother. The most important thing now was to protect Ron's life. Want to leave? Unfortunately, it's too late. R.A. Firth smiled coldly. Spatial imprisonment. Boom! As if it had hit a spatial barrier, the black mist that was shuttling back and forth like a spirit snake finally stopped. You can't escape. As Raphael spoke, the enormous claws that were the size of palm leaf fans pressed down on Ron from all directions. Bone shield. Homelin was anxious, but he still forgot to put up a defense. With a boom sound, R.A. Firth's huge claws pressed down. The bone shield was like a piece of paper, and it only lasted for a second before it was declared to explode. Uffed! A mouthful of blood spurted out from Ron's mouth, and a brilliant blood flower bloomed in the air. Ron's body fell down like a kite with a broken string. "I'm sorry, Ron. I've done my best." Homeland's expression was incomparably withered. He smiled bitterly, and his soul slowly withdrew from Ron's body. "No, Grandpa Homeland, don't," Ron exclaimed. He wanted to reach out to grab Homeland, but he grabbed nothing. He saw that Homeland's soul had become incomparably dim. He smiled at Ron and had already disappeared into the air. At this time, a sharp pain came from his body. It turned out that Ron had already returned to his body. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. Powerful dark power kept flowing through his body, constantly corroding Ron's limbs. In a trance, Ron seemed to see an arm floating in the air and falling down with him. This is... Ron reached out with a trembling hand and gently reached out to grab the arm. At this time, he suddenly realized that the arm was actually his severed limb. Then it was his hand, his foot. As though it was constantly disintegrating, Ron's body became dismembered. Ron finally woke up, and the intense pain was incomparably clear. Finally, his broken body fell heavily to the ground, and he fainted. No! Bellis seemed to have gone crazy. She did not know where she got the strength from, but she struggled to break free from Firth's imprisonment and quickly rushed down. Ron's body had been shattered under the powerful pressure, leaving only half of his body and a connected arm. The dark power on his body was still raging, corroding his remaining body. Seeing Ron's miserable state, Bellis was heartbroken. At this time, Ron woke up a little. He opened his eyes slightly, looked at his mother's beautiful face, and smiled. Ron, you're finally awake. Whoa, Mother is sorry." Bellis hugged Ron's broken body and cried out. At this moment, her heart hurt as if it was being cut by a knife. "It's okay, Mother. I don't blame you," Ron said with a smile. His voice was intermittent. "It's your son. I don't have the ability. I can't save you." At this time, Ron's body was extremely weak. His breathing was rapid, and even his consciousness was beginning to blur. Bellis had already thrown herself onto Ron's body and sobbed. "Mother, you're so beautiful. I've always been thinking about my mother, what she looks like. Fortunately, I've finally met her." Ron smiled and stretched out his trembling hand. He gently stroked his mother's cheek, leaving a bright red bloodstain on Bellis's face. "It's a pity that your son will never be able to see you again. Mother, take care." After Ron said the last sentence, his head tilted unwillingly and he lost consciousness. All the dragons had already returned to their human forms. Seeing this scene, they all fell silent. The water dragon covered his wound, endured the pain, and gently bowed. He looked at Ron with eyes full of regret. If he was a dragon, Frigga's eyes were a little complicated. She did not know why, but seeing Ron become like this, her heart faintly ached. She regretted not stopping the crazy R.A. Firth. "Bellis, have you not woken up yet?" In the air, R.A. Firth's dignified voice sounded. "This human is a disgrace to the dragons. Death is the best ending for him." He glanced at Ron, frowned, and snorted. "He's still alive? Bellis, move aside. I want to kill this bastard with my own hands." "Ron." Bellis slowly put down Ron's body and wiped her tears. She stood up and looked at the sky quietly. "Kill me." "What did you say?" R.A. Firth frowned. "I said just kill me." Bellis suddenly raised her head, and a trace of determination flashed in her eyes. "If Ron dies, there's no point for me to live." Yep. R.A. Firth was furious. He made up his mind and sneered. "All right then, since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish." Raphael almost went mad with anger. He roared and opened his mouth to spit out a dragon's breath. The powerful and corrosive dark energy blasted towards Bellis. Bellis did not move. She slowly closed her eyes. At this moment, a huge black flame had already pounced in front of her. Her black robe was blown up by the strong wind. "No, Chief, don't. Chief is crazy." At this moment, the dragon's elders finally panicked. They flew in front of Bellis to block her, but it was a pity that they were still a step too late. Boom! A protective shield suddenly opened, tightly wrapping Bellis and Ron. The black flame hit the protective shield, and the flames spread out like waves. Not long after, the surroundings were scorched black, and a pungent smell spread. Bellis opened her eyes in shock. Who? Who dares to interfere with the internal affairs of the dragons? R.A. Firth's roar came from the sky. His cold eyes searched every corner of the surroundings. R.A. Firth's gaze fell on Frigga. It was not R.A. Firth's fault, because in the entire dragons, only Frigga had such strength. However, R.A. Firth had miscalculated. Frigga shook her head, indicating that she was innocent. Ha ha! At this moment, a hearty voice was heard, and a figure slowly emerged from the sky. It was a middle-aged human wearing a brocade robe. He had a warm smile on his face. It's you? Seeing the person, R.A. Firth frowned, and the fierce aura on his body was immediately restrained. What are you doing here? The middle-aged man who mysteriously appeared looked at R.A. Firth's huge body and laughed. R.A. Firth, are you crazy? You even killed your own daughter. The internal affairs of the dragons are none of your business. Besides, you also said that you don't care about the affairs of the continent. Although R.A. Firth's attitude was still unyielding, his aura weakened. All the dragons looked at the middle-aged man in the sky in surprise. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. Since when did their chief speak so politely to a human? What made them even more shocked was that they could not see through the middle-aged man's strength. Then, there was only one answer. Thinking of this, all the dragons shuddered. This middle-aged man was actually the same as Chief R.A. Firth, a powerhouse of the divine realm. Who was he? When did a human powerhouse of the divine realm appear in the Noah continent? Everyone looked at each other with this question mark in their hearts. However, they were very clear that R.A. Firth knew this person. It's him? Why is he here? Frigga also frowned, surprised by this person's appearance. The mysterious middle-aged man smiled. I am too lazy to care about the affairs of the continent, but it seems that you didn't do what you promised me. What is it? Spare Ron's life. Impossible. R.A. Firth roared angrily. His huge body was covered in black flames as he bared his fangs and brandished his claws. If Ron is just a heretic, I can let him go and even give him everything he wants. But his other identity is absolutely intolerable. Also just found out about his other identity. The middle-aged man sighed and calmly said. He was referring to Ron's identity as a dragon. He smiled. However, Ron is still somewhat useful to me. I want to take him away. No, the bloodline of dragons cannot be tarnished. R.A. Firth refused without hesitation. Letting Ron live in this world is the biggest insult to the dragons. The middle-aged man smiled and said in a clear voice, What if I must take him away? Just as his voice fell, the atmosphere suddenly became tense. Traces of killing intent filled the air. R.A. Firth clenched his teeth and coldly stared at the mysterious middle-aged man as he constantly growled. A great battle was about to break out. However, the middle-aged man only smiled. He stood in the air with his hands behind his back. His purple robe fluttered in the wind. There was not a trace of hostility. All the members of the dragons became nervous. Some of them stealthily moved away and distanced themselves from the battle. If two powerhouses of the divine realm were to fight, it would not be a joke. Not to mention the entire mountain peak, even the entire dragon island would be destroyed. Beatrice looked at the middle-aged man in astonishment. She did not know why this mysterious middle-aged man would suddenly appear and save her and her son. Although Ron's body was broken, he was still alive. He could still be saved. You win. Facing this mysterious middle-aged man, R.A. Firth finally lost. His body slowly turned back into a human. He waved his hand at the middle-aged man and sighed. Take him away. Thanks. The middle-aged man also let out a sigh of relief. He also did not want to go against R.A. Firth. The mysterious middle-aged man slowly descended and walked to Ron's side. He gently bent down and quietly observed Ron's situation. The power of the undead. Not bad. He is the one I'm looking for. The mysterious middle-aged man muttered to himself. He carefully observed for a while and smiled. Fortunately, he's not dead. If he were dead, I'm afraid I would have to go through a lot of trouble. As he spoke, he picked up Ron's body. You, don't touch him. Beatrice was shocked and immediately came to stop him. Don't worry, Miss Beatrice. I'm saving him. The mysterious middle-aged man smiled, his eyes full of kindness. For some reason, Beatrice actually believed the words of this mysterious middle-aged man. She gently nodded and slowly retreated to the side. The middle-aged man smiled and said to the sky, Don't worry, Your Excellency R.A. Firth. I will make him forget what happened today. What happened today is indeed an unpleasant memory. Up to you. R.A. Firth snorted coldly and said, It doesn't matter if you make him remember. R.A. Firth, wanted to kill him. If he has the ability to take revenge on me, R.A. Firth, will definitely accompany him to the end. R.A. Firth waved his hand impatiently. Take him away. I don't want to see him again. Goodbye. The mysterious middle-aged man smiled. A circle of light appeared on his body, and then an intense white light appeared. The white light was like a ball that enveloped the surrounding space. Not long after, he disappeared with Ron. Spatial teleportation. Who is he? The members of the Dragons were shocked by this scene and whispered to each other. They looked at R.A. Firth with inquiring eyes, as if they wanted to find some clues from his eyes. Raphael ignored those inquiring gazes. His eyes quietly looked into the distance as he muttered to himself, That's right. Necromancy. The Scourge Church. If I'm not wrong, this continent is going to have a lot of trouble from now on. Chapter 517. After an unknown amount of time, Ron slowly woke up. He felt that he had regained some of his consciousness. He opened his eyes and sat up straight from the bed. Ron was in a tent-like place. The tent was black, and even the light inside was dim. However, this was not a problem for Ron. As a necromancer, he was born with night vision. Ron quietly looked around the tent. The equipment in the tent was very simple. Apart from the quilt covering his body and the short table beside him, the entire tent was empty. There was only a glass of water on the table. Ron reached out and gently grabbed the tent's frame. He slowly stood up. At this time, his gaze froze. He saw that the frame he touched had a texture that clearly came from bones. At this time, Ron looked up slightly and saw a ferocious skull. The skull's black eye sockets were looking at him, and its mouth was wide open as if it was mocking him. If a normal person saw a skull in this place, they would be scared half to death. However, Ron was different. He felt a sense of familiarity when he saw the skull. Ron gently stroked the skull and looked around. He was puzzled. Where is this place? Just as Ron was puzzled, there was a sudden clamor outside. Then there was a loud bang. The ground shook violently. What's going on? Ron was shocked and almost lost his balance. At this time, the tent's curtain was suddenly lifted and a figure rushed in. It was a young man in his 20s. He wore a black robe with a skull embroidered on his chest. He looked like a necromancer and held a white bone staff in his hand. When the black-robed young man saw Ron, his eyes lit up and he said happily, Siler, you're finally awake. Come with me, the captain is angry. Siler? Ron was confused. Wasn't he called Ron? Why did he change his name to Siler? I'm Ron, not Siler. Who are you? Ron said stutteringly. Ron? The black-robed young man touched Ron's forehead and said, not knowing whether to laugh or cry, Sailor, did those guys break your brain? You can't even remember my name, and you can't even recognize me? Ron was taken aback. He wondered what was going on. Before he could ask, the black-robed young man was already urging him to leave. Ron had no choice but to follow the black-robed young man out of the tent. Outside the tent, everything was a mess, as if it had experienced countless battles. The air was filled with the smell of smoke, and one or two black-clothed corpses could be seen from time to time. The black-robed young man pulled Ron's hand as they shuttled back and forth through the ruins of the city wall. At this time, Ron knew that the young man was called Nisi. Nisi, where are you taking me? And where is this place? After being pulled far away by the black-robed young man Nisi, Ron finally couldn't help but ask. Hey, it seems that you've really broken your brain. I'm taking you to see the head and reorganize our resistance. Alas, to be honest, we don't have much resistance left. I hope you still have some strength left, Nisi hurriedly said to him as he walked. Although Ron didn't quite understand, he also knew his general situation. Pornographic novels. He didn't know why his soul was attached to a guy called Siler. This guy was also a necromancer and seemed to be at the senior level. He didn't know what Nisi's strength was, but it seemed that he was stronger than him. But why was it like this? Ron was puzzled. Nisi pulled Ron all the way to the top of the city wall, only to see a large number of skeletons standing on the city wall. They were all skeleton magicians, and in the middle of those skeleton magicians stood more than 10 black figures. Seeing Nisi and Ron running past, their eyes swept over. Head Riedel, I brought Siler. Nisi walked in front of Head Riedel and said breathlessly, he just woke up. Head Riedel was a thin, middle-aged man with chestnut hair. His face was slightly pale, and his eyes were as firm as an eagle's. When Riedel saw Ron, he frowned. Siler, you finally came. I thought you were so scared that you peed your pants. His words made the other necromancers laugh as well. What? Those bastards have already attacked. Nisi was surprised, looked around, and asked. It should be soon. I received bad news from the front line. Head Riedel frowned and said. He glanced at Ron. But Siler, if it was a little later, I don't think you'd need to come. I'm sorry. Ron's mouth moved for a long time before he finally said a sentence. He knew that these people were waiting for him. Oh, Riedel was a little surprised. He carefully looked up and down at Ron several times and didn't find anything wrong. He nodded. Prepare for battle. Yes. Nisi and Ron both replied in unison. Yellow fireballs streaked across the sky. Those were the traces left by the magic cannons in the air. In the distance, the sound of killing shook the sky, and the air was filled with the smell of blood. This was a battlefield that treated human lives like grass. Ron now knew that those necromancers were actually a part of a powerful necromancer regiment. The whole regiment was composed of necromancers, and Riedel was the head of this regiment. His strength was a necromancer grand magus. This necromancer regiment had been fighting on the front line. Because of the tragedy of the war, after several big battles, the regiment had been crippled. Originally, there were more than 100 necromancers, but now there were only 20 or so left. Including Ron, they were the last of the regiment's strength. They were originally ordered to rest and reorganize in the city and be on standby at any time. But now that the situation was critical, this necromancer regiment that had already received heroic honors was once again sent out. Be careful, they are rushing up. Nisi pointed below and cried out in alarm. Ron looked in the direction Nisi was pointing. He saw that not far from their feet, a large group of swordsmen and paladins wearing white armor suddenly appeared. They were wearing heavy armor, and the white armor was already tattered and stained with blood. It seemed that they had experienced more than one big battle. These people were several hundred meters away from them. Before they arrived, a fierce, murderous aura had already hit them in the face. They roared and raised the weapons in their hands. The sharp long swords flashed a cold light under the scorching sun. At this time, Ron's eyes instantly froze. This was because he saw a familiar symbol on the person's shield in front of him. It was a cross. On the cross, an angel with wings spread open was engraved. Holy See! Ron's blood rushed to his face. In an instant, his heart was filled with killing intent. That's right, they were the Holy See, Ron's mortal enemies. The enemy had attacked. Riedel frowned. Compared to the others, he was much calmer as the regiment leader. He took out a fiery red bone staff from nowhere and looked around at the remaining people. His eyes flashed with a trace of sorrow. He took a deep breath and said in a clear voice, Everyone, first of all, let me tell you an unfortunate news. When the enemy came here, it meant that the front line had already fallen, and behind us is our Scourge Church's last fortress, Undercity. Do you think we can let these guys rush into the city? We can't. We can't. More than 20 necromancers roared loudly. Their thin bodies waved their bone staffs. Nisi's eyes were bloodshot. His brother, a handsome death knight, had already sacrificed himself in the front line. He was filled with hatred for the Holy See. Ron stood there in a daze. His mouth was wide open and his mind was blank. He just realized that he was now in the battlefield of the Scourge Church 100,000 years ago. He was possessed by a small necromancer, and behind them was the main city of the Scourge Church on the continent of Omros 100,000 years ago, Undercity. It was now the final moment. This, when the world was going on. Riedel glanced at his few remaining subordinates and nodded faintly with a smile on his face. Although the Scourge Church has suffered such a calamity, we can never give up hope. As far as I know, Great Elder Mastos has already activated the spirit-gathering formation left behind by the Lich King in Undercity. He has poured all of his power into the young master, Sarimos. Sarimos is a genius. At such a young age, his strength has already reached the higher levels of the sacred domain. Now he wants to advance into the realm of the gods. As long as a divine necromancer appears in the Scourge Church, all of our predicament will be reversed. Divine necromancer. Riedel's words stirred up everyone's fighting spirit. Even Ron's blood was boiling. Regiment leader Riedel, quickly tell us what we should do. A necromancer shouted. It's very simple. Great Elder Mastos has already given the order to defend Undercity and buy time for young Master Sarimos. Riedel looked around and suddenly raised his voice. Perhaps we will all be sacrificed. Perhaps we will never see our loved ones again. But I, Riedel, will never allow anyone to take a step back. As he spoke, Riedel's face was filled with killing intent. Kill those bastards. Defend Undercity with our lives. All of the necromancers roared in unison. Their eyes turned red as hatred gnawed at their hearts. Almost all of them had loved ones who had died at the hands of the Holy See. Riedel pointed his bone staff forward. Go! Let these Holy See scum have a taste of the power of us necromancers. As the strongest profession in the Scourge Church, we necromancers are not useless. Even if we die, we will fight to the last moment. Riedel, necromancers, listen to my command. For the glory of the Scourge Church. Attack! Under Riedel's command, all of the necromancers immediately launched an attack. The sound of killing shook the heavens and earth. Countless skeleton warriors, and skeleton mages scrambled to climb out from the ground. They held simple weapons in their hands, and a faint green light flashed in their black eye sockets. At this time, the army of the Holy See had already rushed to the front and fought with the skeleton warriors in front of them. The necromancers at the back were not idle either. Countless bone spears, bone spurs, death entanglement, and other necromancy magic were thrown at their enemies one after another. A thrilling and bloody battle unfolded. Chapter 518. Ron was also participating in the attack in the crowd, but it was very strange. He could only summon skeleton warriors, and skeleton mages. He couldn't summon black knights, gargoyles, and so on, not to mention terrifying knights. He only had the strength of a senior necromancer to fight. At this time, a paladin holding a scepter roared and rushed forward. Using his strong defense, he suddenly broke through in front of Ron and smashed down with a heavy scepter in his hand. Bone shield. Ron made a prompt decision and summoned the bone shield. Fortunately, it was Ron who summoned the bone shield. Otherwise, if he summoned the white bone shield, it would definitely shock everyone. That was the skill of a necromancer Grand Magus. However, even if Ron knew how to summon it, he couldn't summon the white bone shield. Boom! The bone shield blocked the paladin's attack. At the same time, a bone spear appeared in Ron's hand. The bone spear stretched forward and ruthlessly pierced the paladin's stomach. The clean and neat stab immediately caused the paladin to be seriously injured. Ron's performance stunned Riedel, Nissi, and the other necromancers. They didn't think that Sylar, who had always been cowardly in their eyes, would become so brave and ruthless. However, in the next moment, something that made them even more flabbergasted happened. They saw Ron roar and ride on the back of a summoned skeleton warrior. At the same time, he cast a skeleton acceleration spell on it. Just like that, he rode it like a war horse. With the bone shield as defense and the bone spear as a weapon, he injured several people in succession. Is this really Siler? Riedel couldn't help but rub his eyes. Nissi also murmured. Since he was injured, he seems to have changed into a different person. And I have never seen this kind of fighting style. Is this really a necromancer? Riedel said. Everyone had such a question in their mind. When did a necromancer become a melee fighter? Kill him. Kill this necromancer. Ron charged in alone and slaughtered everyone in his way. This aroused the anger of the Holy See and also attracted their attention. The warriors with long swords and knights with shields roared and rushed over. The magicians on the battlefield were also attracted to this scene. They aimed their shining magic staffs at Ron's small figure. Die, heretic! A paladin wielding a giant hammer leaped high into the air and swung the hammer in a circle in the air, bringing with it a bright light as it smashed down. Hammer of Storm. Facing the powerful attack, Ron reacted very quickly. He rolled backwards and dodged the huge hammer in the air. The huge hammer smashed into the ground and exploded with an intense light. Boom! As if there was an earth-shattering explosion, a milky white light flashed and the ground cracked like a spider web. The skeleton warrior that Ron was riding on turned into powder in an instant. The one who attacked Ron was a paladin in heavy armor. He was short, but very sturdy. He had a white beard from his face to his chin, and he held a two-handed sledgehammer that was taller than him. One could imagine the terrifying power of the sledgehammer. Pornographic novels quick. Go and stop Siler. Riedel was anxious. He couldn't care less and ordered the few remaining necromancers in his army to attack Ron. In an instant, countless necromancy spells were blasted in Ron's direction. Those black mist-like things were the purest soul power of a necromancer. It's an honorary knight with the strength of a master. Knowing the strength of the opponent, Ron couldn't help but gasp in his heart. Knowing that he was no match for them, Ron chose to escape. Damned heretic, where do you think you're going? The honorary knight with the giant hammer shouted and chased after him. That short necromancer had killed and injured many of his subordinates, making him extremely angry. Die! The white-bearded honorary knight shouted, and the blessed hammer spun towards Ron. Just as the blessed hammer was about to land on Ron's body, a valiant bone shield suddenly fell from the sky and blocked in front of Ron. The blessed hammer of the honorary knight collided with the bone shield, causing a large number of sparks to erupt. The white, jade-like bone shield was placed in front of Ron, constantly emitting a strange soul power. It was like a tombstone surrounded by black fog. The black eye holes of the skull on the front of the shield seemed to emit a bloodthirsty scarlet. Captain Riedel, seeing the figure slowly appear in front of him, Ron was stunned. The one who saved him was none other than Captain Riedel, who had always been dissatisfied with him. In this place, only he had the strength of a master. Get out of the way, leave this guy to me, Riedel said in a deep voice. His eyes were like a viper's staring at the bearded honorary knight, unwilling to relax. Necromancer Grand Magus? The white-bearded honorary knight was clearly shocked and became cautious. He sized up Riedel and cracked a smile. There's actually a Necromancer Grand Magus? Didn't the experts of the Scourge Church all die? The white-bearded honorary knight laughed coldly. Respected Necromancer Grand Magus, open your eyes and take a good look. Not to mention a Necromancer Grand Magus, even a sacred Necromancer Grand Magus wouldn't be of much use. Gloom City is about to fall. You damned heretics, all of you shall be buried with the evil Scourge Church. Riedel took a step forward and took a deep breath before saying, No matter what, I won't let you pass, unless you step over my dead body. The white-bearded honorary knight didn't say anything else. He smiled coldly and slowly lowered the giant hammer in his hand. Riedel also slowly raised the bone staff in his hand. A battle between masters was about to begin. A battle like this was only a small part of Gloom City. Suddenly, The white-bearded honorary knight's eyes were filled with killing intent. Kill, boom, boom, boom. A fierce battle broke out once again. At this time, enemies wearing white armor flooded in and wantonly slaughtered in Gloom City. Gloom City was burning. Corpses covered the usually bustling streets. Blood flowed slowly like a river. The final battle in the streets had finally broken out. At the same time, countless believers of the Scourge Church were mobilized. They wore simple leather armor and held weapons that they picked up from God knows where. They fought with the soldiers of the Holy See. However, how could these believers who were usually aloof from worldly affairs be a match for the Holy See soldiers who were like wolves and tigers? They fell under the flashes of swords and the sounds of metal clashing. Those young girls who were wearing black robes were stripped naked by a group of white-clothed soldiers. And these soldiers of the Holy Church vented the most primitive desires of humans with the screams of the girls. Gloom City under the apocalypse was like hell. Kill, kill, kill. Ron's eyes were bloodshot. Without the white-bearded honorary knight, the normal Holy See soldiers were no match for Ron. Ron had inherited the mantle of Homelin. He was ruthless and merciless. Soon, a large number of corpses fell around him. However, Ron wasn't in a good state either. His body was covered with countless wounds of various sizes, and his originally clean and tidy necromancer robe was torn like a beggar's. His exposed skin was stained with dark red blood. Siler, save me. At this time, Nisi's screams came from not far away. At this moment, he was surrounded by several Holy See soldiers behind a small wall. He didn't have Ron's strong, close combat ability. He could only wait for death when he was surrounded by several soldiers. Ron looked back, and his eyes suddenly turned red. Although he didn't have much contact with Nisi, Ron knew that Nisi was a warm-hearted person. He wouldn't watch Nisi die. Several bone spears appeared out of thin air and stabbed the Holy See soldiers like vipers. Bang, bang, bang. The bone spears summoned by Ron were first class in power and speed. The soldiers didn't even have time to scream before their throats were pierced. Are you okay? Ron reached out and pulled Nisi up. Thank you, Siler. Nisi said gratefully to Ron. He really didn't understand when Siler, who had always been weaker than him in the academy and always needed his protection, became so powerful. Nisi now had a whole new level of respect for Siler's strength. Of course, Ron wouldn't tell him his name again, even though he still didn't know what had happened. Boom! At this time, a loud noise came from the sky. Then, a powerful oppressive force spread down from the sky. In the air, two figures, one black and one white, were constantly entangled. The powerful force even made the natural wind chaotic. Due to the reaction force, countless rubble and stones were swept up into the air. Sacred Domain. Only a battle between powerhouses of the Sacred Domain could cause such great power. Ron and Nisi both leaned against a collapsed wall, taking advantage of this rare opportunity to recover a trace of soul power. They quietly looked at the sky. Even great Elder Mastos has made his move, Nisi said with a serious expression. His opponent is Antonio, the so-called first pope of the Holy See. Great Elder Mastos? Ron curiously looked at the thin old man in the sky. That old man was also a necromancer, but he was a powerhouse of the Sacred Domain. Great Elder Mastos has always been the supreme leader of the Scourge Church. Nisi sighed. Now even he has made his move. It can be seen how bad the situation is. Siler, do you think our Scourge Church will perish? Nisi glanced at Ron and said, This. Ron moved his mouth, but in the end, he didn't say the answer. In fact, after this battle, the Scourge Church had truly perished. Without waiting for Ron's answer, Nisi laughed self-deprecatingly. But I believe that the Scourge Church won't perish. As long as the undead don't die, natural disasters don't disappear. This saying that has been passed down for thousands of years will definitely be confirmed, and young Master Sarimos is our last hope. Nisi's eyes flickered with confidence because the young master he spoke of, Sarimos, was also a necromancer. As long as he wakes up, he will definitely lead all the believers of the Scourge Church to drive away the invaders and walk towards the final victory, Nisi said firmly. Ron didn't reply. Although he knew the final outcome, he didn't know if the young Master Nisi spoke of would awaken in the end. From Nisi's words, Ron knew that there were no more god-level powerhouses on the continent of Amros. All of them had fallen in the holy war that had lasted for 100 years. If Sarimos awakened, it would undoubtedly be a chance to turn the tables. But what would the true direction of history be like? At this moment, a huge fireball soared into the sky from the tide of enemies. With a boom, it caught Great Elder Mastos off guard, who was completely focused on fighting Antonio. Great Elder Mastos' body fell like a kite with a broken string. His fall seemed to signify the end of a natural disaster. Nisi was shocked. Not good, Great Elder Mastos. At this moment, a shadow flashed beside Ron, and a stray arrow accurately shot into Nisi's chest. Nisi's eyes widened in disbelief as he looked at the arrow in his chest. His body struggled and trembled violently. Ron was shocked. Nisi, what happened to you? At this moment, an extremely cold aura emanated from the center of Undercity. It was so powerful that it made one's heart palpitate. At the same time, the dust on the city walls fell with a boom, and there was a strong tremor on the ground. This is... Ron's eyes widened. This powerful and cold aura suppressed all the power in the world. Nisi looked at the sky quietly, one hand covering his chest where the arrow had been. There was a smile on his face, and he quietly breathed his last roar. At this moment, there was an earth-shattering roar, and a bone-piercing chill spread from the center of Undercity. Instantly, the city walls froze, and the blood solidified. Everyone was suddenly in the coldest winter. Sarimos, the young master of the Scourge Church, the powerful divine necromancer, the last god-level powerhouse on the continent of Amros, finally. Chapter 519. Asterisk boom. Asterisk a cloud of smoke erupted from the center of Gloom City. A gray figure darted out of the castle and soared into the sky at a blinding speed. This was a handsome young man. His upper body was naked, and his lower body was only wearing a pair of pants. His long hair was a demonic white, and his body was still wet, as if he had just been fished out of the water. He was Seremus, the young master of the Scourge Church. Silence. When Seremus appeared, the entire battlefield fell silent. Everyone held their breaths and stared intently at Seremus's every move. They were all intimidated by Seremus's powerful strength. Seremus caught Mestos in the air. Mestos was his father, but they were not related by blood. Mestos' face was as white as paper. His frail body could not withstand the sneak attack of the sacred magus. His internal organs had been crushed, and he was barely breathing. At this moment, Mestos forced his eyes open. Seeing that it was Seremus, a smile appeared on his face. "You're finally awake." "Yes, father." Seremus' face was indifferent, as if he was an emotionless creature. "I hope it's not too late." "It's not too late. It's never too late." Mestos slowly closed his eyes, large drops of turbid tears seeping out of his eyes. "The Scourge Church. I leave it to you. I don't wish to see it destroyed by my hands." Under everyone's gaze, Seremus carried Mestos' body and slowly descended to the ground. At this moment, Mestos had already breathed his last. All the believers of the calamity fell silent, including the warriors who were still fighting. They bowed deeply towards the elder who had been holding the fort until the end of the battle, until his heart and soul shattered. A sorrowful atmosphere enveloped the entire battlefield. Even Ron's eyes were filled with tears. Antonio and the rest of the Sacred Alliance did not have any expressions of schadenfreude. On the contrary, they were deeply worried. Seremus quietly placed Mestos' body on the ground and took a step back. He placed one hand on his chest and bowed lightly. "Father, don't worry. I will definitely make these enemies pay the price they deserve." Seremus said slowly. His long white hair danced in the air, and his smooth back revealed a smooth line. His thin and weak body did not have a trace of excess fat. He slowly turned around and smiled at Safety Neo and the others. His cold eyes were filled with bone-deep hatred, and his smiling face became even more ferocious. Seremo smiled. At this moment, he slowly raised his hand and extended it into the air. In the sky above Undercity, dark clouds began to gather. At this moment, the ground began to shake violently. Heavens! What's going on? I can't stand properly. What a terrifying aura. What is that white hair guy doing? The soldiers of the Sacred Alliance were shocked. Even the experts of the Sacred Domain were shocked. Boom! With an earth-shattering sound, a huge head appeared above Undercity, accompanied by an extremely cold aura. It was a gigantic monster. Its skull-like head was devoid of flesh, and its eyes were bloodthirsty. Its rotten body was covered in ice crystals. When it stood up, it was as big as Undercity. The monster slowly stood on top of Undercity. It stretched out its huge claws and spread its wings, which were large enough to cover the entire city. It raised its head and let out an earth-shattering roar. Pa! 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 The ground shook, and a cold aura quickly spread. Not long after, the entire Undercity seemed to be covered in a layer of silver frost. This is... Antonio's eyes widened. Frost WIRM. The eyes of the soldiers of the Sacred Alliance were filled with fear. The Frost WIRM was once the strongest existence in the Amros continent. It was the strongest undead summoned by the Divine Necromancer. However, with the death of the Divine Necromancer of the Scourge Church, the Frost WIRM was declared extinct. When this Frost WIRM appeared again, it evoked the terrifying memories that had been suppressed in everyone's hearts. It's a Frost WIRM. The Divine Necromancer has appeared again. Some of the more timid soldiers of the Sacred Alliance retreated in fear. In front of this terrifying undead creature, they felt so small. Young Master Sarimos. Reedrel's eyes were filled with a gratified smile. At this moment, his body was broken into pieces. Yes, he had lost. He had lost to the honorary knight with the giant hammer. At this moment, he was only left with his last breath. At this moment, Antonio had already landed. The fire's sacred magus, Jennifer, hurriedly ran to Antonio's side and shouted anxiously. The Frost WIRM has appeared. Quickly think of something. Yes, Antonio. If this continues, we can only retreat. A tall orc warrior also walked over and said, "We can't retreat." A female elf said resolutely. She was the priestess of the elf race, the spiritual leader of the elf race in name. She said in a clear voice, "If we retreat now, the Scourge Church will definitely make a comeback. We may not be able to do anything in the short term, but one day we will meet our doom." The Sacred Alliance was a rebel army formed by the Human Holy See, the Magicians Guild, the Warriors Guild, the Knights Guild, the Orcs, the Elves, and a small number of magical beasts. They united all the forces of the Amros continent and launched a general attack on the Scourge Church. The Orc army attacked the North Gate, the Elven army attacked the South Gate, and the Sacred Alliance, the Magicians Guild, the Warriors Guild, the Knights Guild, and other human organizations attacked the main gate. After a cruel street battle, they finally met in the Undercity. No one would have thought that the appearance of a divine powerhouse would be like adding a heavy weight to one end of the scale, turning the battlefield around. "I don't have a damn idea," Antonio said angrily in the face of the questioning of his allies. The appearance of a divine powerhouse cast a shadow over everyone's hearts. Damn it! How could a divine powerhouse appear in the Scourge Church? Didn't the experts of the divine realm die out long ago? The brave orc prince was scared out of his wits. He had personally led the orc army into the city, burning and looting along the way, but now he was starting to feel uneasy. "I don't care. You must think of a way, or the Magicians Guild will be finished." Jennifer threatened Antonio. At this moment, the Frost WIRM moved. With a kick of its legs, its huge body flew into the air, and with a flap of its wings, a gust of wind blew. The Frost WYRM emitted an intimidating aura. Its huge body swept across the sky like a dark cloud, blocking out the only trace of sunlight. It's coming. Antonio's face changed. At this moment, the Frost WYRM was already above them and opened its mouth to breathe out a dragon breath. Be careful. Run. The soldiers of the Sacred Alliance dodged in fear, but no matter how fast they were, how could they escape the Frost WRM's attack range? Boom! With a loud bang, the dragon breath descended, and a large amount of white smoke rose from the ground. The white smoke was none other than the terrifying ice element breath. The ice element breath continued to spread, and the area within a radius of 10 miles turned white. In just a moment, everyone was frozen into ice sculptures. The soldiers of the Sacred Alliance had their mouths wide open, and their faces were filled with fear. Their bodies were still in a running posture, but they were all dead. Among the dead was the fire sacred Magus Jennifer. Sarimos was angry at her for sneaking up on his father, and this wave of attack was directed at her. Ron stared at the sky, and his face was filled with surprise and joy. Hope rekindled in his heart. With such a powerful Frost WYRM, what was there to be afraid of in the Sacred Alliance? At this moment, Antonio's body flashed out from a corner, and his face was very ugly. Although he ran a little faster, his head still suffered some relatively serious cold injuries. Antonio looked down at his hand and saw that his head was slowly turning a demonic white. The outside of his black leather gloves was already covered in a layer of frost. Damn it! Antonio cursed. He squeezed hard, and the power of the frost dissipated, and his frozen hand returned to its original state. Damn it now. Now what? Antonio looked at the Frost WYRM in the distance, and a trace of hatred flashed in his eyes. His heart sank. The appearance of a divine powerhouse meant that the Scourge Church would be able to turn the tables. Antonio was extremely unwilling. The newly appointed Pope, the leader of the Sacred Alliance, might become a prisoner. Antonio was not afraid of death. On the continent of Amros, death was not the most terrible punishment. The most terrible punishment was to have one's soul stripped and one's body turned into a walking dead fighting machine. Thinking of what the Sacred Alliance had done to the Scourge Church, he shuddered. At this moment, the Frost WYRM spat out a large mouthful of dragon breath, which contained the power of frost. Wherever the dragon breath passed, everything returned to silence. Whether it was a master or a powerhouse of the sacred domain, after coming into contact with this terrifying dragon breath, without exception, they all turned into ice sculptures and died. No one could withstand this terrifying aura. Even the powerhouses of the sacred domain could not. The wisest way was to use a single word. Run. Kill. Kill them. Kill the Alliance dogs. The appearance of the Frost WRM greatly boosted the morale of the Scourge Church. They ignored their serious injuries and took the opportunity to launch a counterattack against the Alliance soldiers. Under the Frost WRM's peerless ferocity, the Alliance soldiers' morale plummeted, and many of them were killed. Retreat. Retreat. The Sacred Alliance soldiers, including the humans of the Holy Sea, the elves, the orcs, and countless magical beasts, were completely defeated by the Scourge Church's counterattack. They slowly retreated from the Undercity. We can only retreat. The Orc Prince said to Antonio, Sir Antonio, I'm sorry, but I can't use the flesh and blood of my brave orc soldiers to resist the Frost WRM's attack. Moreover, it's not something that can be resisted. The elven priestess was silent. It seemed that she was also making her own plans. No one was willing to use the lives of their people to clash with a terrifying undead creature like the Frost WYRM, and she was no exception. The appearance of a divine powerhouse put the Sacred Alliance in danger of disintegration. Chapter 520. Everyone, don't worry too much. A smile appeared on Antonio's face. It's just a frost dragon. Does our alliance, our friendship forged with blood, have to go through such a test? Antonio pretended to be relaxed, but their allies were not easy to deal with. The Orc Prince frowned and asked, "Your Excellency Antonio, do you have a way to deal with this frost dragon?" The Elven Priestess and the other powerhouses of the sacred domain were also looking at him. They were helpless against this powerful frost dragon. "That's right." Antonio nodded slowly and said, but his gaze swept across the faces of the powerhouses of the sacred domain one by one. "The Holy See is the leader of the Sacred Alliance, and we were the first to start the Holy War. At the same time, we sacrificed the most, so the Holy See wants half of the Amros continent," Antonio said. The powerhouses of the sacred domain looked at each other, but some of the smarter ones noticed that Antonio was referring to the Holy See. In other words, he excluded the other human alliances. At this critical moment, Antonio opened his mouth wide. He wanted to reap the most benefits after the war. Half of the Amros continent was filled with the forces of the Holy See. His position could even replace the Scourge Church. All the powerhouses of the Alliance were silent, and no one expressed their opinion. However, no one had the confidence to deal with the Ice Blast WIRM. If Antonio could do it, it would not be impossible. "What do you think?" Antonio quickly asked with a smile. He looked at the Orc Prince and the noble Elven Priestess. As long as these two nodded, everything would fall into place. "I agree," the Elven Priestess replied. The elves had always been aloof from worldly affairs. She nodded first and said, "As long as Your Excellency Antonio can defeat the Frost Dragon, we elves will worship you as our leader on the Amros continent in the future." Antonio nodded with satisfaction, and he looked at the Orc Prince. The Orc Prince thought for a while and finally nodded. Compared to the Holy See, they were more afraid of the Scourge Church's revenge. If the Scourge Church turned the tables at this time, none of the forces of the Sacred Alliance would have a good time. "Hee, then leave this frost dragon to me." A smile finally appeared on Antonio's face. He was a pornographic novel. He said with a smile, "I hope you two don't forget your promise." After saying that, he moved his body and flew up into the sky. "Is he really confident?" The Elven Priestess, who was holding a long staff, asked with a frown. "I hope so." The Orc Prince shook his muscles, and the heavy armor on his body made clattering noises. He said with a solemn expression. At this moment, Sari Mose was standing on the head of the frost dragon with his arms crossed in front of his chest. He had a cold expression on his face. Everywhere he went turned into a sea of ice. Of course, the soldiers of the Sacred Alliance were also fighting back, but this kind of counterattack was no different from scratching an itch for the huge frost dragon. The Frost WRM's attack was methodically carried out, and the Sacred Alliance was completely routed. In a short moment, the Sacred Alliance had already paid the price of nearly 10,000 people. Whether it was the beastmen, elves, or the magic beasts they rode, they were all unable to withstand a single blow from the terrifying Frost WRM. At this time, Ron finally breathed a sigh of relief. The situation on the battlefield was one-sided. At least for now, it seemed that the Scourge Church's comeback was certain. He saw the soldiers of the Sacred Alliance retreat like a tide. "With such a powerful existence like Your Highness, how can the Scourge Church be destroyed?" Ron's face showed a trace of a relaxed smile. "This is simply impossible." He thought that there might be a chance for a turnaround, but the cruel future told him that this was impossible. Ceremo's face was expressionless. He didn't feel sorrow or pity or even anger. He felt that all this was what he should do. At this time, Ceremo's eyes froze. His gaze fell on a floating figure in front of him. Antonio, suddenly seeing the leader of the Sacred Alliance, Ceremo's eyes couldn't help but show a trace of anger. Antonio said with a smile that wasn't a smile, "I was wondering who it was." "So it's Your Highness, young Master Sari Mose, my defeated opponent. Haha, your beautiful blonde hair has turned white. I almost couldn't recognize you." Ceremo's eyes showed a trace of murderous intent. He sneered, "Antonio, don't be complacent too early. Today is the day you die. Do you think the current you can defeat me, a powerhouse of the Divine Realm?" Antonio laughed. "A defeated opponent will always be a defeated opponent. Even if you become a powerhouse of the Divine Realm, today you, and the evil scourge church can't avoid the fate of destruction. You're courting death. Sarimos was finally enraged. He abruptly urged the frost dragon under his feet to speed up and pounce on Antonio. Roar! The frost dragon let out a loud roar that shook the heavens and earth. It flapped its wings and sped up, a terrifying cold aura rushing towards Antonio. Ha! Antonio was not afraid and laughed loudly. His figure slowly rose, flying higher and higher. At the same time, his body emitted a circle of dazzling white light. He slowly said, "Sorry, Mose, don't think that you're invincible just because you've become a powerhouse of the divine realm. That's only for the continent of Omros. I can tell you clearly that above the divine realm, there's God." Antonio slowly spat out a word. At this moment, his body suddenly shone brightly. The elven priestess was shocked. She pointed to the sky and exclaimed, "Look, what's that? That's..." The Orc Prince clenched his teeth. His eyes were filled with intense disbelief. His hands that were holding a pair of giant axes could not help but tremble violently. A milky white halo was emitting from Antonio's body, spreading out in circles. His face revealed a touch of holiness, and the holy light emitted from his body shone on the earth like the sun. This is... Ron widened his eyes in disbelief. His body was trembling, and so was his heart. He knew what the earth-shattering aura that erupted from Antonio's body was. God! That was the power of God. Guangming's divine power. The elven priestess's pupils suddenly shrank, and she blurted out, "Impossible! How can Antonio have divine power? That's the projection of God's avatar." The Orc Prince was also flabbergasted. He slapped his thigh. No wonder this kid actually communicated with the power of the gods of the main plane. Guangming's divine power sprinkled down like thousands of rays of sunlight. At this moment, a huge shadow appeared on Antonio's body. It was the image of a four-winged angel. He held a giant sword in his hand, and his tall figure stood quietly in the air. His tense face was full of majesty. That was the will of God, and it made people have an impulse to worship him. He was a commander of the legion of holy angels from the main plane of order, Michael. The one that appeared in the air was only a projection of his avatar. Although this projection of the avatar's power was only 1% of his own, he had something that no one on the continent of Omros had. That was divine power. Antonio had communicated with the divine realm through his own power, and finally summoned the gods to descend. Holy angels! Facing this huge shadow that stood proudly in the air, Sarimos' expression finally changed. Impossible! Impossible! Could it be? When did the legion of angels from the main plane of order descend on the continent of Omros? Could it be that the legion of angels was behind the destruction of the Scourge Church? Thinking of this, Sarimos' hands and feet turned cold. He clenched his fists tightly, but his body trembled involuntarily. Lord Michael has finally descended. Antonio laughed maniacally. He floated in the air, his face full of malevolence. Sarimos, go to hell. Today, I will bury you and the Scourge Church completely. After saying this, the huge avatar wielding the holy sword swung it down fiercely. Boom! The sword broke through the air and slammed into the frost dragon's body. There was an earth-shattering sound, and a huge amount of divine power overflowed. It was like a strong tsunami erupting from the boiling sea. In an instant, the huge frost dragon was completely swallowed up. No! Sarimos' face was distorted. He only now realized how insignificant the power he had obtained through the spirit-gathering formation was in front of divine power. A strong white light appeared on the frost dragon's body. The light burned continuously, illuminating the entire sky. The colossal body of the frost dragon, which was so powerful that nothing could stop it, began to disintegrate. Boom! 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 Like a sinking ship, the powerful frost dragon began to fall. At this time, the Sacred Alliance was in an uproar. Kill! Kill these heretics! We can't let them revive! the situation that had just calmed down was once again thrown into turmoil. The scourged church believers who had been in heaven a moment ago fell back to hell in an instant. Serene's weak body was sent flying. His mind was blank, and it was as if time had stopped. Is this the end? Is the scourged church destined to perish in my hands? Serene smiled bitterly. Facing God, he no longer held any hope of victory in his heart. He slowly raised his hand. On his body, holy flames burned continuously. This was the powerful and irresistible divine power of Guangming. Traces of black gas spread out from his body, and his soul energy dissipated. The frost dragon was disintegrating, and so was he. Father, I can't do it. I really can't do it. Even if I become a divine powerhouse, I can't save the scourged church's fate. Serene murmured. I'm sorry. Father, I'm sorry. After Serene said this, he slowly closed his eyes with endless regret and sorrow. His body turned into a black smoke and disappeared with the wind. At the same time, the frost dragon also disappeared instantly. Attack! At this time, the commander of the Sacred Alliance gave the order. The fierce soldiers of the Sacred Alliance easily broke through Gloom City. What followed was a cruel massacre. Countless believers of the Scourged Church fell in pools of blood. Chapter 5:21. Kill, kill, kill. Countless soldiers of the Sacred Alliance poured into Undercity. Their ferocious faces were covered with bulging veins. They raised their butcher's knives at the defenseless women and children. One by one, the black-clothed figures fell into a pool of blood. Massacre, the most barbaric act of all living creatures. Hundreds of years ago, no one would have thought that this scene would actually take place in the main city of the Scourged Church. The once powerful and terrifying Scourged Church that had spread across the entire Amros continent had met with such an end. The smell of blood filled the entire city. The sun seemed to have hidden in the clouds because it did not want to see this savage scene. Huff, huff, huff. Ron desperately gasped for breath, his eyes bloodshot. His soul force had been exhausted to the point of exhaustion. Around him, corpses had fallen to the ground. Riedel's necromancers had been completely wiped out. He was the only one left. No, it was not just Riedel. The entire Undercity had no power to resist. All the powerhouses had been exhausted. What do I do? What do I do now? Ron hid in a dark corner. He used the dark side of the sun to hide his figure. He vigilantly looked at the armored soldiers in the distance running past. He was at a loss. Most of them were humans. There were also orcs and elves. If this was a nightmare, Ron hoped that he would wake up quickly. Sa? At this time, a weak voice entered Ron's ears. Although he was not used to this name, Ron knew that it was calling him. In a corner, Ron found the heavily injured Captain Riedel lying on the ground. Captain Riedel. Ron wiped his tears and quickly ran to Captain Riedel. He saw Captain Riedel lying on the ground, his body in pieces. The lower half of his body had completely disappeared, and his internal organs had flowed out. There was no part of his upper body that was intact. Captain Riedel. Ron's tears gushed out. Although Captain Riedel was not very satisfied with him, Ron could feel Captain Riedel's concern for him. As Captain Riedel opened his eyes with great difficulty, and a smile appeared on his face. I didn't think that you're not dead. I didn't think that you're usually so lazy, but at the crucial moment, your will is so strong. In this cruel war, it was impossible to survive without a strong will. This had nothing to do with strength. Riedel was very clear about this. He regretted not being stricter with Sailor in the past, so that he could learn more. Commander Riedel. Ron choked with sobs. Riedel took a deep breath with difficulty. His face was flushed red, and his speech became more nimble. Ron knew that this was the last moment before death. Sailor, you need to run. The Scourged Church is finished. Run away. Run as far away as you can. Hide. Don't show up again, no. Captain Riedel, I'm going to take you with me, Ron said as he wiped his tears. Don't be silly. Child, I can't go on anymore, Riedel said. He smiled with great difficulty, and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. You brat. Haven't you always been thinking about my weapon? Take it away. Take everything. I have. Run as far away as possible. Don't. Come back. At this moment, Riedel used the last of his strength to grab Ron's shoulder and stared at him. You are the last. Necromancer. You must. Stay alive. You must. Remember, as long as the undead don't die, Scourge will not be destroyed. After saying this, Riedel's eyes dimmed, and his body fell down powerlessly. I will. Captain Riedel, I will definitely kill my way out. Protect myself well. Ron said slowly as he put down Riedel's corpse, his eyes filled with determination. He took the red bone staff from Riedel and all his equipment and stuffed them into his clothes. As he was doing all this, a soldier of the Sacred Alliance noticed him. There's someone here. It's a necromancer. Kill him, this evil undead. Kill. The soldier of the Sacred Alliance angrily shouted as he rushed over, his blood-stained sword desperately slashing at Ron's body. Die. Ron's eyes flashed with a trace of murderous intent. He waved the bone staff in his hand, and a burst of cold air was released. Frost Nova. Boom. Dozens of bodies flew into the air, and when they fell to the ground, they had already turned into cold corpses. After using Riedel's bone staff, Ron's attack power increased by another level. He quickly summoned a skeleton warrior and rode on its back. The skeleton warrior swung its legs and rushed out like an arrow leaving a bow. Chase. Don't let him escape. The soldiers of the Sacred Alliance were shocked and angry as they shouted. That attack just now had cost the lives of more than 10 soldiers. At this moment, Ron had already escaped far away. Antonio slowly walked through the streets of Undercity. Undercity, this ancient city that had stood for thousands of years, had now become hell on earth. The surroundings had turned into a sea of fire, but those raging flames could not harm him. Antonio looked at all this with satisfaction. From now on, the Scourge Church that had dominated the continent for thousands of years would no longer exist, and his holy see would become a major force on the continent of Amros. Of course, he would not forget that the one who had given him all this was the avatar of God, Lord Michael. If not for Lord Michael's secret support from the main plane of order, he and the Sacred Alliance would never have been able to overthrow the Scourge Church. Your Excellency Antonio. At this moment, a voice called out to him. It was the priestess of the elves and the prince of the orcs. They quickly walked over, and when they saw the scene of Antonio killing Salamis, their eyes were filled with reverence. So, it's the priestess and the prince. Antonio smiled faintly. I've done what I asked, and I hope that both sides will keep their promises. The priestess and the prince of the orcs looked at each other and sighed. Of course. Antonio smiled and asked, Is there anything I can help you with? A hint of arrogance flashed in his tone. It's like this. The priestess frowned. Undercity has been conquered, and the Scourge Church has been destroyed. I think we should restrain our army and stop the massacre of those defenseless women and children. They're all innocent. Stop the massacre? Antonio frowned, and a hint of displeasure flashed in his eyes. At this moment, a soldier of the Holy See hurried over. My lord, we've discovered the mysterious basement of the Scourge Church. Mysterious basement. Antonio's eyes lit up when he heard this. He did not bother to talk to the two of them, and hurriedly walked in the direction the soldier had pointed. The priestess and the prince of the orcs looked at each other, and their eyes were filled with helplessness. They could only brace themselves and follow. Antonio slowly opened the door to the basement, and a gust of turbid air assaulted his face. He quickly walked in. At this moment, he suddenly discovered that this mysterious basement was actually the treasury of the Scourge Church. There was a dazzling array of gold, silver, and jewels, rows of weapons, chests of gold coins, and boxes of black crystal coins that were treated as treasures. It was enough to make anyone go crazy. Ha ha ha! Ha ha! These things are all mine. The treasures of the Scourge Church. Thousands of years of accumulation. They're all mine. Antonio revealed his arrogance. In front of a group of powerhouses from the sacred domain, he did not hide his ambition at all. Men, seal all of these things. Antonio loudly ordered. The elves, orcs, and their allies who had rushed over showed dissatisfaction in their eyes. This Antonio was clearly trying to monopolize everything. However, they were intimidated by the ferocious might of Antonio's divine power. They looked at each other, and no one dared to step forward. Reporting to my lord, in that small room over there, we discovered a secret room, and in the secret room, we discovered many heretical books. At this moment, another soldier of the Holy See stepped forward and looked at the powerhouses around him and stammered. Books! Antonio frowned. He picked up a book with a black cover and casually flipped through a few pages. He already knew that this was a notebook on necromancy. These necromancy research notes, which had accumulated thousands of years of wisdom, were the most important treasures to the Scourge Church. They were the crystallization of countless necromancers' blood, sweat, and tears. Sure enough, it's heretical. Antonio closed the book and casually threw it into the blazing fire. Burn all of these things. Burn them? All the powerhouses could not help but look at each other. They knew what burning these things meant. If anyone burned the crystallization of the elves' blood, sweat, and tears, the elves would definitely come after them. Sir Antonio, you mean to say that we should burn all of them? The elven priestess asked, stuttering. That's right. Leave none of these heretics alive. Antonio nodded indifferently. He glanced at the elven priestess. Also, you asked me to give the order to stop the massacre. I personally think that it's inappropriate. These heretics who cultivate evil powers should be exterminated. Not only should the massacre not stop, it should instead be expanded. He waved his hand. Pass down my orders. From now on, the Scourge Church and necromancy are not allowed to exist on the continent of Amros. Once discovered, all forces of the Holy Alliance will work together to kill those who dare to shelter. Kill those who shelter. Kill those who sympathize with the Scourge Church. Kill those who cultivate necromancy. Kill those who possess heretical books. Kill, 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 kill. A series of bloody kill words stunned everyone. Looking at Antonio, whose face had become distorted due to his ferocious expression, all the powerhouses of the sacred domain tactfully chose to escape. They knew about pornographic novels. Chapter 5:22. Quick, don't let this guy escape. Chase, don't let him escape. In the alleys of Undercity, Ron rode the skeleton warrior and ran in a panic. Behind him, dozens of soldiers of the Sacred Alliance chased after him. The strength of the Sacred Alliance soldiers chasing after Ron wasn't very high. If it was any other time, Ron would have killed them without hesitation. But now, he didn't make a move. Once he was entangled by these soldiers, it would bring him endless trouble. At this moment, Ron didn't have the strength of a grand magus necromancer. He didn't have a soul ring. He had nothing. He was just Siler, an ordinary necromancer. Damn it, this can't go on. Seeing the soldiers getting closer and closer, Ron became more and more nervous. The worst thing was that he didn't know the way to Undercity and could only run. At this time, a large group of soldiers appeared in front of Ron. When they saw Ron, they excitedly surrounded him. One had to know that Lord Antonio had given the order that anyone who killed or survived a necromancer would be richly rewarded. These soldiers all began to risk their lives. In the narrow alleys, Ron's heart tightened. There was no way forward, and there were soldiers chasing after him. He can't escape. Go. The soldiers of the Sacred Alliance seemed to know about Ron's predicament. They cheered and rushed forward. The long swords in their hands flashed with cold light. Their faces were filled with cruelty. Just when Ron thought that there was no way out and was ready to risk his life, a pile of things attracted his attention. It was a pile of quicklime. It looked like it was used to repair the walls of Undercity. Got it. Ron's heart skipped a beat. He quickly ran over and used his bone spear to pick up a few bags of quicklime and threw them at the soldiers of the Sacred Alliance. Careful, he's throwing something. A soldier of the Sacred Alliance shouted. However, Ron's target wasn't him. He waved the bone staff in his hand and a green aura instantly formed. Death coil. Boom. The death coil hit the bags of quicklime. The quicklime exploded and covered the soldiers of the Sacred Alliance in dust. Don't let him escape. I'm not good. My eyes, my eyes. The quicklime not only blocked the vision of those soldiers of the Sacred Alliance, but also caused different degrees of burns in their eyes. Some soldiers of the Sacred Alliance covered their eyes and howled. When the soldiers came back to their senses, they saw that there was no one in front of them. They didn't know where the necromancer had gone. Where is he? He ran away. He can't have gone far. Hurry up and find that guy. The soldiers of the Sacred Alliance were terrified. They looked around for Ron, but they could not find any trace of Ron. At this time, someone had already reported to the higher-ups. Antonio was directing the soldiers of the Holy See to move boxes of gold, silver, and jewels out of the basement. The other powerful beings of the sacred domain were mad with jealousy, but they did not dare to act rashly. At this time, a soldier quickly walked in front of him and whispered a few words in his ear. What? Did he run away? Before the soldier could finish speaking, Antonio jumped up in anger. He waved his fists and roared. What are you doing, you bunch of good-for-nothings? Dozens of people surrounded one person, and he ran away. Get out! Get out of here! The elven priestess asked, What's wrong? Lord Antonio, look at how angry you are. I'm so angry, Antonio said angrily. When those guys were cleaning up the battlefield, they encountered a necromancer in the Undercity. In the end, they let him run away. Don't you think that's infuriating? The Orc Prince heard this and said disapprovingly, It's just a necromancer. If he ran away, so be it. In the current continent of Amros, he can't make any big waves. No. Antonio quickly calmed down. He paced a few steps and said with a gloomy face, If you want to cut the weeds, you have to dig up the roots. We can't let our guard down on this issue. Thinking of the Scourge Church's saying, As long as the undead are alive, the natural disasters will not be extinguished. Antonio could not help but shudder. He turned around abruptly, pointed at the soldier, and said fiercely, Go after him. If you can't catch him, bring his head to me. Yes, Lord. Ron did not run far. He was just hiding in a dark corner not far away. As the saying went, the most dangerous place was the safest place. Ron was hiding right under their noses, but the soldiers did not discover him. After a hasty search, they left while cursing. After confirming that the soldiers had left, Ron slowly revealed himself from his hiding place. He heaved a sigh of relief and lamented that he was indeed lucky. However, this time, Ron did not dare to be reckless. He summoned a crow and scouted the sky. After identifying the path, he slowly escaped from the Undercity. When night fell, the Undercity was ablaze with flames. Countless black smoke rose into the air, and from time to time, one or two screams could be heard from the city. Ron stood on a small hill and looked at the burning Undercity. He could not help but sigh. It seemed that the Scourge Church's destruction was predestined. As someone who had experienced it, he could only sigh endlessly. However, he was Siler, a very ordinary necromancer. It was time for him to leave, but the continent of Amros was so big. Where could he go? I can only take one step at a time. Ron thought silently as he slowly left the Undercity. After the Holy War, the continent of Amros was a desolate scene. Wherever Ron went, there were traces of war everywhere. The Soul Tower, a burning Scourge church building, was full of desolation. Ron walked for 3 days. During these 3 days, he did not see a single person. All he saw were countless rotting and unrotting corpses. He also saw a group of wild dogs and vultures fighting over something. Ron did not bring anything when he left the Undercity. At this moment, he was tired, hungry, and thirsty. At this time, he saw a village. His eyes lit up, and he could not help but quickly walk towards it. The village was very quiet. It was obvious that it had experienced a war. Is there anyone here? Ron called out, but there was no response. Just as Ron was about to leave, he saw a trembling figure. It was an old woman with a head of white hair. She panicked when she saw Ron. My lord, what can I do for you? The old woman stuttered, her eyes full of fear. Granny, Do you have anything to eat here? I haven't eaten for a few days. Ron asked politely. Yes, yes. The old woman nodded like a chicken pecking rice. She led Ron to her home in the village. Ron touched his waist pouch. Fortunately, Siler had left him a few gold coins. Otherwise, he would have to go hungry now. The old woman's home was very simple. What surprised Ron was that there was a girl of about 17 or 18 years old in her home. It seemed that she was her granddaughter. She was a little younger than Ron. When she saw Ron, she also panicked. My lord is coming to our house to eat. Hurry up and prepare. The old woman glared at the girl and scolded her with a stern face. Oh, yes. The girl seemed to have just recovered. She nodded and walked out quickly. After a while, she came back with a few pieces of black bread that were about to go moldy. Thank you, Granny. I will pay, Ron said gratefully. No need to thank me. My lord, take your time. We don't need to pay, the old woman said hesitantly. Ron nodded. He didn't care too much. He picked up a piece of black bread and started to eat. Only then did Ron realize that there were suddenly more people in the village. They were poking their heads out to look at the house. When they saw Ron, their eyes were filled with fear. These were all ordinary villagers. Ron didn't mind. He continued to wolf down his food. However, he didn't notice that the 17 or 18 years old girl had already left. My lord, take your time. There's still a lot. The old woman warmly greeted, but her eyes were looking outside from time to time, as if she was waiting for something. Ron said vaguely. Suddenly, he raised his head. His eyes were filled with disbelief. Through the eyes of the crow, he saw that on the horizon, there was a pornographic novel. A cavalry in white armor. They were lined up in a neat formation. They were majestically galloping toward the village. That's right, their target was this village. At this time, Ron understood everything. A trace of killing intent appeared in his eyes. He suddenly kicked over the table, stretched out his hand, and grabbed the old woman who had no strength to fight a chicken. He shouted sternly, "Damn it, are you the one who sent the message?" The old woman laughed and coldly said, "That's right. Respected Necromancer Lord, when you were eating, I'd already sent people to report to the Sacred Legion station here. You're courting death." Ron's heart was filled with killing intent. He reached out his hand and pointed a bone spear at the old woman's throat. At this moment, the door was knocked open with a crash. The young girl rushed in and pounced on the old woman. She said with a sobbing tone, "I was the one who went to report. If you want to kill me, then kill me. Let my grandmother go." The old woman smiled bitterly. "My lord, all of this was arranged by me. My lord is a necromancer. If I didn't do this, the whole village would be executed by the Holy See in the name of heresy. They would die anyway. My lord, if you want to kill me. I only beg you to let my granddaughter go. She's innocent." Looking at the old woman's resolute gaze and the young girl's tears, Ron's throat seemed to be choked by something. He couldn't speak. At this time, the sound of horse hooves was getting closer. It seemed that there were no less than a few hundred people. They had already begun to surround the village. Bastard! Ron cursed fiercely. He didn't know who he was cursing at. He let go of the two people and released the hazy shadow spell. He quickly escaped through the window. "That's him. Don't let him escape." A Holy See soldier shouted excitedly when he saw Ron escape. On the endless plain, Ron rode on the skeleton warrior and fled for his life. However, no matter how fast the skeleton warrior was, it couldn't outrun a warhorse. At this time, the knights behind were getting closer and closer. Ron's heart grew more and more desperate. At this time, a knight behind him laughed sinisterly. He slowly took out a composite bow from his body, knocked an arrow, and pulled the bow into a full moon. With a whoosh, the magic arrow left the bowstring and attacked Ron's back like a meteor chasing after the moon. The arrow was very fast. When Ron realized it, it was too late to dodge. He felt a pain in his chest. The arrow had already penetrated his heart. Ron could no longer maintain his balance and rolled down a long slope. At this moment, Ron saw something that he couldn't be more familiar with in his hand. It was the bone staff that Riedel had given him. This bone staff was so familiar that it was impossible to forget. Ron had used it with his own hands. He even remembered the position of the crack on the bone staff clearly. That was the legendary Darkwater staff, the weapon that Ron had picked up in another plane. As it turned out, the corpse that Ron had encountered in the other plane was Siler, the last necromancer of the Scourged Church. Ron only felt a stabbing pain in his head. With a boom, the world spun and the scenery in front of him became blurry. Ron turned over and sat up on the bed. His eyes were wide open and he was panting heavily. His clothes were drenched in cold sweat. A dream. So it was just a dream. But why did that dream feel so real? Ron discovered that he was in a brightly lit room. The decorations on the bed didn't seem luxurious, but it felt very practical. Where's this place? Ron looked around and asked. At this time, he felt a stabbing pain in his head. I remember. Ron finally remembered. He was seriously injured by R.A. Firth on Dragon Island. Even his body was broken into pieces. At this time, he suddenly lowered his head and discovered that his body was miraculously healed. It was as if he had never been injured. Ron only felt his mind go blank. Chapter 523. At that moment, the door creaked open. An old woman pushed the door open and walked in. She was stunned when she saw Ron lying on the bed. You're awake. You are. Ron looked at the slightly aged face. He felt that it was very familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before. The old woman smiled faintly and slowly approached Ron's bed. What's the matter, Ron? Have you forgotten about me so quickly? I've seen her before. I must have seen her before. Where is she? Ron, who had just woken up, was a little confused. At that moment, a thought flashed through his mind. He remembered the mysterious store. This old woman was none other than the old woman from the mysterious store. He had once bought a necklace there. You're Mary. Ron finally recognized the person and called out her name in surprise. You finally recognized me, Mary said with a smile. Pornographic novel. Ron looked around and saw that his body was intact. He asked doubtfully, You saved me? Taking someone away in front of the Dark Dragon Firth, R.A.? I don't have the ability to do that. Mary chuckled. It was my master who saved you. Your master? Who is it? Do I know him? Ron was even more confused. He knew many people, but none of them had the ability to save him from Firth, R.A. Could it be strength? Or Anne Undine? Ron's heart skipped a beat. However, this place did not look like the territory of the orcs, nor did it look like the elves. Moreover, he felt that it was unlikely that strength was here. There's no need to guess. You can't know my master. Mary smiled calmly as if she had seen through Ron's thoughts. But my master instructed me to bring you to see him as soon as you woke up. If you have any questions, you can ask him. I don't know him, but he saved me from R.A. Firth. Ron became more and more confused. When he heard that Mary's master wanted to see him, Ron nodded. No matter who the other party was, it was necessary to thank them in person for saving his life. Ron had been unconscious for a few days and had just woken up. He looked rather indecent. After excusing himself from Mary, he went to wash up alone in his room. The cool water splashed on Ron's face, instantly waking him up. He looked at the water, which seemed to be flowing with dark red blood. He remembered that dream. This dream was so real, as if it was foreshadowing something. Dreams were illusory and real at the same time. When the illusory dream was connected with the cruel reality, Ron almost believed that the continent of Omrose in his dream was the real existence of history. Gloom City was filled with raging flames, countless corpses, and streams of blood. Recalling the dream, Ron's heart flashed with a trace of intense hatred. Unknowingly, his state of mind had undergone a huge change. After Ron finished washing up, he opened the door. Mary was already waiting outside. She smiled when she saw him. Please follow me. This was a small courtyard, elegant and noble. The weather was good, and the sun was warm when it shone on his body. To meet a mysterious person who could save him from R.A. Firth, Ron couldn't help but feel uneasy. He was even more curious about the person's identity. Some godly powerhouse? That was the only explanation. Otherwise, no one would have such ability. Ron followed Mary through a large garden and arrived in front of a small house. "This is the place. Ron, go in yourself." Mary brought Ron to the front of the small house, bowed slightly, and left. Many nobles' servants were not allowed to enter without permission. Ron knew this rule. Ron nodded, walked forward, and opened the door. It was a small attic. Walking into the hall, there was a long staircase at his feet. Ron walked up the wooden stairs to the second floor. The second floor was a long corridor, and at the end of the corridor was a small room. Ron stood in front of the door. Just as he was about to knock on the door, he found that the door was ajar. He hesitated for a moment, but still decided to push the door and enter. Once he entered, Ron was stunned. In the spacious room, there were rows of neatly arranged bookshelves. The bookshelves were filled with a dazzling array of books. The books were stacked neatly, as if they were soldiers waiting to be inspected. On the floor, there was a large pile of unorganized books. They were messily piled up together and were as tall as a small mountain. Ron scanned the entire room, but he didn't find a single person. "Where is he?" Ron was puzzled. "You're here." At this moment, a voice startled Ron. He saw a figure lift his head from the pile of books. It was a middle-aged man. He was sweating profusely, and his hair was a bit messy. He looked very ordinary. He wore a large nightgown and wore glasses. With Ron's spiritual sense as a grand magus necromancer, he actually didn't discover this person's existence. The mysterious middle-aged man said as soon as he saw Ron, "Sorry, can you help me organize these books? I accidentally knocked over a bookshelf just now." The mysterious middle-aged man pointed at the bookshelf behind him and said, "Okay." Ron agreed and nodded. He wouldn't refuse help. Moreover, the other party had saved his life. It was only right for him to do something for him. The two of them organized the small mountain of books on the floor. Ron was responsible for neatly stacking the books and handing them to the middle-aged man. Then, the middle-aged man would put the books back on the bookshelf. During this process, the two of them didn't say anything. They were both silently doing their own things. After half an hour, the two of them finally put the messy books back on the bookshelf. Looking at the neatly organized bookshelf, the two of them let out a sigh of relief at the same time. "I really like to read, and I especially like to collect all kinds of books. The books here are only a small part of my collection. Hee, I'll let you see a joke." The mysterious middle-aged man chuckled. He turned his head and gave Ron a friendly smile. He seemed very approachable. Ron couldn't imagine that this middle-aged man, who was as friendly as an uncle next door, was the person who had saved him from Firth Rand. "Thank you, Ron. I wasn't wrong. You really are a warm-hearted person," the mysterious middle-aged man said. "You are." The mysterious middle-aged man called out his name, which surprised Ron. He was sure that he had never seen this middle-aged man before. I almost forgot to introduce myself." The middle-aged man smiled and pushed the glasses on the bridge of his nose. Ron, let's get to know each other. My name is Noah." Noah. When Ron heard this name, he didn't feel anything at first. But later, he suddenly thought of something and his eyes widened. Ron remembered the legend. In ancient times, as the god's messenger, he led the human race to find the new world. The hero of the story was called Noah. Could it be that he is? Ron stared blankly at Noah, his eyes filled with disbelief. The middle-aged man called Noah just smiled. He wasn't surprised by Ron's shock. "You are." Ron took a step forward excitedly and blurted out, "You are the god's messenger who saved the human race in the legend, Lord Noah." As soon as the words left his mouth, Ron knew that it was inappropriate. That legend had been passed for 100,000 years. How old was this human in front of him? It was undeniable that some sacred domain or divine domain experts could increase their strength to prolong their lives. But no one could live for 100,000 years, not even divine domain experts. Just as Ron was about to apologize for his ridiculous idea, Noah spoke. Ron, congratulations. You guessed right." "Ah." Ron's mouth was wide open. He looked at Noah and stood there in a daze. His mind was blank. Chapter 5:24. Noah smiled and slowly walked back to his desk. He picked up the cup, took a sip of water, and then slowly put it down. He raised his head slightly and glanced at Ron. You must be very strange. That's right. I'm the legendary Noah that has been circulating in the Noah continent. The place you're standing on is the continent named after me. In other words, I'm the master of the Noah continent. Noah smiled at this point. It might not be appropriate to call me master. We have another name there, and that is plane manager. Plane? Ron was a little stunned when he heard this term. He did not understand the meaning of plane. Fortunately, Noah opened his mouth to resolve his confusion. The so-called plane is actually a parallel, independent space. Everything in this space includes the Noah continent, the sky, and the sea. He gently pushed up his glasses. At the same time, it also includes the countless living creatures in this plane. After Noah said this, Ron understood. This unprepossessing middle-aged man in front of him was actually the highest manager of the Noah continent, and this continent was also named after him. Ron could not help but feel deep respect for this man who had saved countless living creatures. At the same time, he also found it strange that such a big figure would be related to a little necromancer like him. Speaking of this, Noah smiled. He pulled out a chair on the desk and sat down. He quietly looked at Ron and said, Ron, I think you must want to know why I took such a huge risk to save you from Firthar. Ron did not speak and only nodded silently. His purpose here was to know everything. He had lost consciousness after being injured by Firthar, and he did not know what happened after that. Noah smiled slightly and nodded secretly. Ron's calmness had aroused his interest. He paused for a moment and then continued. To be honest, after learning of your existence, I was also quite surprised. I didn't think that there would be necromancers in the Noah continent. He glanced at Ron. I'm talking about the real ancient necromancers. They practiced the pure necromancy magic from the ancient continent of Omros 100,000 years ago. Ron's heart shook. You saved me because I'm an ancient necromancer. Yes and no. Noah smiled. He didn't answer Ron's question directly. When you were unconscious, did you enter that dream? Ron was even more surprised. This you know? Noah laughed. Of course I know, because I was the one who created your dream. I showed you the last moment of the Scourge Church's destruction 100,000 years ago. Noah pushed his glasses up slightly. I believe that you must have some kind of immersive feeling, right? Ron had to admit that this dream was too real. He had possessed the body of an ordinary necromancer from the Scourge Church's undercity, Siler. He had witnessed the moment before the Scourge Church's destruction with his own eyes. That hatred, despair, and helplessness had filled his heart, and he had been unable to forget it for a long time until he woke up. However, the fact that Noah could manipulate Ron's dream made Ron even more curious about him. Noah pushed his glasses up and said seriously, The Scourge Church's destruction of the Scourge Church's destruction. The reason why the Calamity Church perished wasn't because of the power struggle, but because of the intervention of a powerful external force. My goal is to let you see this point. The divine shadow avatar in your dream is the best proof. Ron agreed with this point of view. If not for the God Shadow clone at the end, the Scourge Church would definitely be able to turn the situation around with the strength of Seremo's divine realm, and even take back everything. Other than the Holy See, the other forces of the Sacred Alliance were just fence-sitters. Once the Scourge Church turned the tables, they would turn their spearheads against the Holy See. Then, they would kneel in front of the Scourge Church and cry bitterly, begging for Seremo's forgiveness. Ron thought about it seriously for a while, but still did not quite understand. He said respectfully, Lord Noah, there's still something I don't quite understand. Since the Holy See defeated the Scourge Church in the Omros continent 100,000 years ago, why is the current Omros continent, which we call the other plane, showing signs of doomsday, even becoming a paradise for strange beasts? That's a good question. Noah stood up and said, What you saw in the dream is not the whole story. There's a follow-up. A follow-up? Ron asked. This is also the reason why I brought all the living beings out of the Omros continent and came to the Noah continent. Noah said with a sigh. His eyes were a little dim, and he waved his hand. Let's not talk about it anymore. Take a good look at it. You should know what I'm talking about. At this moment, Ron felt the space around him suddenly change. The next moment, he was in a place that seemed to be high up in the sky. Below his feet were floating white clouds. Ron was shocked. He felt like he was about to fall. At this moment, Noah's voice sounded in his ear. He did not know when he had disappeared. Don't move. You're still standing where you were. Everything you see now is just an illusion I've shown you, just like the dream you had before. Ron gently stepped on the ground. Sure enough, the ground was solid. He was still in the room, but looking at his surroundings, he felt that he was 10,000 meters in the air. It was a little creepy. At this moment, Noah's voice sounded in his ear again. Don't be distracted, Ron. Watch carefully. What you're seeing now is the truth of the destruction of the Amros continent. Apart from me, no one else on the continent knows the truth. You're the second. When Ron heard this, he hurriedly calmed his mind and focused on reading. He felt that a soul-stirring secret was about to appear in front of him. As Ron watched, Noah explained. Although he could not see Noah, his voice was transmitted to Ron's ears without missing a word. This was the 10th year after the Holy War on the Amros continent. The scars of the war were gradually recovering, and the continent was thriving. Without the Scourge Church, the Holy See was able to develop rapidly in the Amros continent, and its influence occupied half of the continent. With Antonio's breakthrough to the Divine Realm, the Holy See's prestige in the Amros continent rose to the peak. It was vaguely 70% of the Scourge Church's strength in the past. The other 30% was the elves, orcs, and a small number of magical beasts that had been suppressed all this time. However, good times did not last long. On a certain day in the 10th year, a huge energy vortex suddenly appeared beside Ron. Within the vortex, there was a terrifying power that made one shudder in fear. Not long after, a large number of gargoyles emerged from the vortex. They hissed and covered the entire sky, followed by a large number of crypt demon kings, zombies, ghouls, abominations, and other undead creatures. Ron even saw the most powerful frost WIRM. There were more and more undead creatures, forming an extremely terrifying undead army. There were more than 100 million of them. The undead army on the ground was as densely packed as ants. In the sky, dark clouds covered the entire sky. Even the sunlight was affected by the undead creatures that filled the sky, causing it to become dim. This is an undead army. Ron was tongue-tied. He was shocked by the terrifying number of the undead army. But what shocked him even more was yet to come. At this moment, a terrifying power that made one's heart tremble suddenly came from the huge energy vortex that was constantly rotating. This power even caused the surrounding space to tremble. This power exuded a sinister and strange aura, causing Ron, who was watching from the side, to feel his heart thumping uncontrollably. As that power continued to seep out, even the earth trembled and countless gravel rose into the air due to the reaction force. At this moment, the undead creatures on the ground let out a loud roar that shook heaven and earth. They raised the weapons in their hands and prostrated themselves on the ground, as if inviting their king to descend into the world. Ron saw that the black power seeping out of the vortex was getting thicker and thicker. The entire vortex seemed to be unable to withstand it and began to tremble violently. In an instant, a black figure slowly descended from the sky. This figure was a black-haired man with a tall stature. His entire body was wrapped in black flames, and he wore an ugly skeletal mask. His long black hair fluttered behind his back, and he wore a long black robe. The patterns on the robe were strange and beautiful. His upper body and shoulders were covered with a thick layer of bone armor, just like the face of a devil. Cold, fierce, powerful, like a god descending, the undead army welcomed the black-haired man with earth-shattering cheers. They raised their weapons high and had a respectful expression on their faces. The black-haired man slightly nodded, and his pitch-black eyes looked down on the entire continent. The Lich King. Ron's heart trembled. He recognized the black-haired man who looked down on the world and cried out in surprise. That's right, he's the Lich King. Noah's voice sounded in Ron's ears. His tone was full of praise. This is 10 years after the destruction of the Scourge Church. The Lich King has led the Scourge army back. How is this possible? Isn't the Lich King dead? Ron asked in astonishment. Who told you that the Lich King is dead? Noah said, he's only missing. No. He went to take care of some matters. At this time, Ron saw that the Lich King didn't find any traces of the Scourge Church in Amros. He felt very strange, but he quickly learned the truth from a pitiful person's head. That person's soul had been extracted while he was still alive. From his soul, the Lich King read the information he wanted to know, including the fact that the Holy See had launched a holy war and destroyed Undercity. After learning the truth, the Lich King flew into a rage. He commanded an undead army numbering in the hundreds of millions, majestically marching towards the Holy Sea's holy mountain. Along the way, the Scourge army destroyed countless countries. The entire continent of Amros was plunged into misery and suffering. No one could stop the terrifying undead army, and no one could stop the furious Lich King. In front of the powerful Lich King, the so-called experts of the sacred domain and even the experts of the divine domain were like chickens. Chapter 5:25. The invincible undead army trampled on the land of Amros. On the continent, all the races rose up in resistance, including the orcs who were physically strong and the elves who were gifted in magic. However, without exception, they were all crushed by the undead army led by the Lich King. The blood-red skull flag that constantly fluttered in the wind had become a nightmare for all the races. The Scourge army easily conquered the Holy Sea's holy mountain and captured all the bishops of the Holy See. As the first pope, Antonio suffered the most. His soul was ripped out of his body while he was still alive, and he was tortured by the Lich King. The Holy Dynasty, which had been famous for a period of time in Amros, was destroyed in just a few days. The Lich King and the Scourge army's terrifying battle prowess left a deep impression on Ron. The situation was settled. The Lich King's Scourge army once again occupied the entire Amros continent. All the powers trembled under the pressure of the Scourge army and the Lich King. The heroes who started the Holy War were all prisoners. Those who needed to be dealt with were dealt with. The blood-red skull flag of the Scourge army was once again planted all over the Amros continent. Ron let out a sigh of relief. Seeing the Lich King bring the Scourge army back for revenge always made him feel carefree. Is it over? Ron asked. He thought that this was the end of the story. Not yet. Noah's low voice sounded in his ear. At this moment, the scene in front of Ron changed. Suddenly, streaks of light appeared in the sky. They were like meteors that streaked across the sky. There were at least 10 of them. Within each of the flying balls of light, one could faintly see a clear figure. The figure had blue eyes and a tall nose. They wore light armor and held all kinds of weapons in their hands. There was a pair of huge white wings on their back. They were flying at an extremely fast speed. It's an angel! Ron cried out involuntarily. These people looked very similar to the angel statues on the murals of the Holy See, as well as the angel statues in the Holy Cathedral. That's right. They are the legion of holy angels from the main plane of order. Behind the angels were a large number of troops. They were composed of paladins, priests, swordsmen, holy archers, and other professions. From their appearance, it could be seen that they were not humans. Although it was not as exaggerated as the Calamity Army, there were still tens of millions of them. Of course, the strongest among them were the angels. Those birdmen with a pair of pure white wings all had the strength of the divine domain. The most powerful one was an angel with 4 wings. He wore heavy armor and held a sword of light in his hand. His 4 wings were dozens of meters long and covered the entire sky like white clouds. According to Noah, this was the archangel of the legion of holy angels, Holy Angel Michael. This was the original body of the god's shadow clone. Ron's heart thumped as he watched. Lord Noah, Does this mean that the Legion of Holy Angels has been involved in the war between the Holy See and the Scourge Church since a long time ago? That's right. Noah nodded and replied, "This is one of the reasons why I wanted to tell you. The destruction of the Scourge Church was not accidental. It was manipulated by a pair of invisible hands. So, this so-called holy war launched by the Holy See was a conspiracy from the beginning." Ron continued watching. The legion of holy angels from the main plane of order descended and engaged in an earth-shattering battle with the Calamity Army from the main plane of death. The battle between the archangel of the holy angels Michael and the commander of the Calamity Army, the Lich King, shocked the entire continent. Ron was shaken to the core. He had never seen such a crazy battle before. With a casual wave of the hand, a mountain peak was cut in half. With a giant sword slashing down, an unfathomable crack appeared on the ground. In Ron's opinion, Michael and the Lich King were not fighting at all. They were destroying each other. Under the pressure of a powerful force, the entire continent of Omros was shattered. All living things were annihilated. Volcanoes erupted, glaciers were broken, and billions of tons of dust floated into the sky, covering the sun. The sky and the ground were dark. Countless cities were destroyed, and countless mountains were flattened. What kind of power was this? Ron's hands and feet were cold. His heart was trembling. This kind of power that could destroy the world and move mountains was something he did not even dare to imagine. At this time, the various races of Omros began to save themselves, including humans. The refuge was filled with countless humans from various races. During the end of the world, gold became the least important thing. The survivors would even fight to the death for a piece of black bread. At this time, a strong white light shone in front of Ron's eyes. Pornographic novels, the illusion ended, and everything returned to normal. Ron returned to the room again, only to see Noah looking at him with a smile. Ron calmed himself down. He had a feeling that he had not had enough. The story of Omros had not truly ended. Just like that, the continent of Omros was destroyed. I brought all the creatures of that continent to Noah. Of course, there was no legendary Noah's Arkansas. I only opened up a few spatial teleportation channels and sent them here. Of course, other than humans, there were also elves and orcs. Noah smiled. So that's how it was. Ron finally understood. The continent of Noah was the successor of Omros. The legend was also true, but the later generations had deliberately exaggerated it. Then, the remnants of the Holy See, elves, orcs, and magical beasts came to Noah and developed. However, the extinct Scourge Church remained there forever. What about Michael and the Lich King? What happened to them? Ron asked after some thought. Dead, they're all dead, Noah said calmly. Michael and Hieronymus were evenly matched in strength. In the end, they perished together. Ron thought for a long time before realizing that the Hieronymus Noah mentioned was the name of the Lich King. For some reason, Ron felt a sharp pain in his heart. He didn't know why, but when he heard this news, he felt somewhat sad. The Calamity Church that had once flourished for a period of time had fallen to such a state. Apart from feeling heartache, he also felt boundless emotions. Lord Noah, I want to know why you're telling me this. Ron asked calmly at this moment. He knew that as the manager of the plane, Lord Noah would not tell him this for no reason. As if he had already expected Ron to ask this, Noah smiled. Because you have an important mission. As the only ancient necromancer on Noah and the successor of the Lich King, rebuilding the Scourge Church is your mission. Rebuilding the Scourge Church. Hearing this, Ron's heart began to beat fiercely. Rebuilding the Scourge Church. Restoring the former glory of necromancy, inheriting the will of the Lich King, and having the blood-red skull flag once again float in the skies of Noah. Whether it was for Grandpa Homelin or for himself, this was an unattainable dream. Such a strong thought had never appeared in Ron's mind, but he gritted his teeth and suppressed this thought. The reason was simple. He did not have a strength. Without strength, rebuilding the Scourge Church would be a joke. Even though the council had already revoked the order to kill Ron, this did not mean that he was safe. The Holy See already hated him to the core and would not let him go if they had the chance. As if he had seen through Ron's thoughts, Noah smiled. Ron, I will give you enough support in this matter. Your enemies mainly come from the Holy See. Don't worry, I will not let them go too far. However, whether the Scourge Church can regain its rightful glory in your hands is up to you. As the manager of the plane, I cannot interfere too much. Ron's brows relaxed. He clearly knew what it meant to receive Noah's protection. Lord Noah, why are you helping me? Ron took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. There was no such thing as love or hatred without reason in this world. Ron did not let joy get to his head. He calmed down and began to guess the other party's purpose. I once owed Hieronymus a favor. I thought that I would never be able to repay it until I knew of your existence. Noah smiled and stood up from the desk. He sighed softly and said, Well, I've said all that I have to say. Then goodbye. Ron. At this moment, his figure slowly faded. He waved his hand and said, Ron, the Scourge Church is Hieronymus's blood, sweat, and tears. You must inherit it. After saying this, Noah's figure gradually disappeared. Lord Noah is leaving. Seeing that Noah was about to leave, Ron was a little anxious. He still had a lot of questions to ask. At this moment, Noah's chuckle could be heard from afar. Ron, I've already told you what you need to know. As for what I haven't told you, don't ask. Sometimes, knowing too much is not good for you. That's all, goodbye. Noah's voice became softer and softer until it finally disappeared. Looking at the neat and empty study, it was as if no one had ever been there. Ron knew that Lord Noah had already left. He had said all that he needed to say. Even if he knew the rest, he would not tell him. Forget it. Anyway, I know most of what I need to know. I've finally solved the mystery in my heart. Ron took a deep breath and felt a sense of relief. But at the same time, his heart became heavy again. The Scourge Church. Ron clenched his fists tightly, and a glimmer of light appeared in his eyes. He suddenly turned around and strode out of the door, his footsteps unprecedentedly firm. This was a new beginning. High up in the courtyard, Noah's figure slowly appeared. His gaze quietly stared at Ron's departing figure, and a trace of a smile appeared in his eyes. However, Ron did not notice him. Noah muttered with his hands behind his back, 100,000 years. 100,000 years. These words have been hidden in my heart for 100,000 years. Hieronymus, I believe that if you see this scene, you'll feel very happy too. Chapter 5:26. When Ron walked out of the loft, he found that Mary was already waiting at the door. When Mary saw Ron, she gently bowed and smiled. Ron, you finally came out. Master instructed me to wait for you here. Wait for me? Ron was a little stunned. Yes. Mary smiled and bowed again. Please follow me. Ron followed Mary through a garden and arrived at a plaza. In the plaza, a tall building appeared before his eyes. It was a huge triangular tower that pierced through the clouds like a sharp sword. All sorts of magic runes were carved on the tower. What is this? Ron asked in surprise when he felt the aura coming from the tower. This is a power converter. Mary smiled and said. She didn't tell Ron what this thing was for. Instead, she said to him, Ron, please follow me. Ron followed Mary through the small door of the tower and walked into this strange triangular tower. There was a small door at the bottom of the triangular tower for people to enter and exit. After entering the interior of the triangular tower, the tower was a little dark, but it didn't pose much of an obstacle to Ron's vision. Through the weak light, Ron saw a huge pool that went all the way to the center and was descending. Around the pool were sculptures of several creatures that looked like dragons. The dragons were opening their mouths wide, as if they were about to spit something out. There was no water in the pool. It was dry. Ron, go inside, Mary said to Ron. Ron nodded and walked to the center of the pool along a flight of stairs made of some unknown material. Mary waved her hand slightly and Ron's feet moved. He almost couldn't stand steadily. A semicircular device suddenly rose from under his feet. What is this? Ron was shocked. He stood on a tall rock and didn't know what to do. It's nothing. Sit properly. Just like how you usually cultivate, Mary said kindly. This is a power converter. It can convert origin energy into soul force that you cultivate. Origin energy? Ron was stunned. This was the first time he had heard of such a thing. However, he obeyed and sat down in the middle of the semicircular stone. I think you must be familiar with this thing. Mary nodded and said with a smile. As she spoke, she took out a few black things from her bosom. These are black crystal coins. Ron was shocked. However, he didn't know why Mary took out the black crystal coins. That's right. The black crystal coin is the crystallization of the power of origin. It is also the specific manifestation of the power of origin. As Mary spoke, her hand moved slightly and the black crystal coin slowly rose from her palm. The black crystal coin seemed to have magical powers as it rose higher and higher in Ron's eyes. In the end, it rose to the ceiling of the triangular tower. There was a magical formation engraved on the ceiling. The magical formation opened its arms as if to welcome the arrival of the black crystal coin. With a click, the black crystal coin was embedded in the magical formation above Ron's head. It looked like a resplendent gem in the night sky. Mary heaved a sigh of relief. Her wrinkled brows smoothed out. She smiled at Ron and said, "Ron, are you ready?" "Ready?" Ron was a little surprised when he heard Mary's words. "What do I need to prepare?" "Prepare to advance to Sacred Domain Expert." Mary smiled. As soon as her voice fell, the small box containing the black crystal coin suddenly emitted a dazzling light. At this moment, the entire triangular tower seemed to have come alive. It started to rotate continuously. Those mysterious magical runes seemed to be burning as they emitted traces of blue light. At the same time, a dazzling light suddenly shrouded Ron's head, illuminating the dark space around him. At the same time, the eyes of the several dragon-like creature sculptures lit up. With a splash, a jet of black water spurted out from their mouths. The black water column in the pool, under the illumination of the blue light, slowly rose into the air like water vapor, constantly floating in the air. This. Ron was flabbergasted. That black energy wasn't anything. It was the most primitive and pure soul energy. This soul energy penetrated the entire space and gathered towards the center of the pool. Ron only felt an explosion in his mind. Countless soul energy poured in and drilled into his soul like soul strands. Ron's soul was like a land that had been dry for a long time encountering spring dew. He frantically absorbed the soul energy. Ron could feel that his soul energy was rapidly growing. As he absorbed a large amount of soul energy, Ron's sea of knowledge started to tremble. The soul floating above his sea of knowledge was constantly growing stronger. At this moment, Mary's voice sounded in Ron's ears. "Ron, don't be distracted. Concentrate on absorbing the soul energy." Ron's heart trembled when he heard Mary's words. He immediately calmed his mind and quietly entered a state of cultivation. After calming down, Ron's absorption of soul energy became noticeably faster. A faint membrane of light appeared around his body. Black soul energy happily swam around his body. This soul energy was simply too massive. Even though Ron was frantically absorbing it, he could only absorb a portion of it. He could only slowly digest and absorb it. Black crystal coins were the crystallization of the universe's origin energy. These crystals were being converted into soul energy through the energy converter for Ron to absorb. After absorbing a large amount of soul energy, Ron's strength was rapidly growing. Ron looked at Ron, who was cultivating inside the energy converter. Her eyes flashed with gratification as she muttered to herself, "With Master's permission, I can only use 5 black crystal coins." "Ron, how much energy you can absorb from these 5 black crystal coins will depend on you. I hope you can advance to the sacred domain as soon as possible." The origin energy within the black crystal coins was released and converted into soul energy for Ron to absorb. However, how much Ron could absorb would depend on his luck. It was also possible that he might not be able to absorb any at all. In that case, the 5 black crystal coins worth nearly 100 million gold coins would be completely wasted. It would also fail to live up to Lord Noah's painstaking efforts. However, this was not a problem for Ron. He concentrated on his cultivation. A large amount of soul energy was being absorbed into his body. At the same time, Ron's soul energy also began to grow stronger. Soon, he reached the boundary of master rank. At this moment, he began to break through the barrier. Once he broke through the barrier, he would become a bona fide sacred domain expert. Ron was well aware of this. That was why he especially cherished the opportunity before him. Ron sat in the middle of the energy converter with his eyes closed like a meditating old monk. The pool was already filled with a black liquid that looked like flowing blood. As if summoned, the liquid turned into water vapor and gathered around Ron's body. It lingered on. Ron did not reject it. He absorbed it madly. Green flames erupted from his body. The flames burned as if they were evaporating all the water vapor. Mary looked at Ron for a while before silently walking out. Chapter 5:27. Apart from Mary, the matter of Ron's advancement to the sacred domain also affected another person's heart, and that was Noah. Noah was standing on a small hill, quietly looking at the small, triangular tower in the distance. The triangular tower was constantly rotating, mysterious runes appearing and disappearing from time to time. Black light soared into the sky, forming a huge energy vortex in the sky. Vast amounts of origin energy were shining down through the triangular tower. For a moment, even the surrounding space revealed traces of abnormality. Noah stood quietly, not saying a word. Even though his expression was normal, one could still see that his heart was filled with anticipation. Mary's figure appeared behind Noah. She gently bowed and said, "Master, Ron has begun absorbing the origin energy." Noah nodded lightly and replied non-committally. "I'm watching," said Mary. "According to Master's instructions, I've already used 5 black crystal coins to help Ron advance. I just don't know how much he can absorb and whether or not he can become a sacred domain powerhouse." Noah nodded calmly. 5 black crystal coins are more than enough. Although the power converted by the energy converter matches his, it's not an easy task to absorb it. It requires extremely high talent and a firm mind. If the soul power converted from so much origin energy can't help Ron advance to the sanctuary realm, then there's no need for me to help him anymore. Noah nodded calmly. 5 black crystal coins are enough. Although the energy converted from the origin energy is compatible with his own strength, it's not easy to absorb it. It requires extremely high talent and a firm mind. Noah said calmly, as if he was talking about something that had nothing to do with him. "Yes, Master," Mary replied. "I understand." Mary fell silent at this moment. She stood behind Noah and stared at the tower in the distance together. The triangular tower in the distance continued to rotate. A large amount of origin energy was converted through the energy converter. Light radiated in all directions, and the overflowing energy filled the entire sky. Of course, this was not something that could be finished in a short period of time. After watching for a long time, Mary was already feeling bored. She thought for a moment and couldn't help but ask, "Master, can I ask you a question?" "Go ahead," Noah replied. His eyes were still fixed on the triangular tower in the distance, motionless. "Master, with your status and identity, why are you helping a necromancer?" Mary asked, "Do you really owe someone a favor?" "Favors are only one aspect." Noah glanced at her and answered, "When I was wandering in the divine realm, the Calamity Army wrote pornographic novels. Heremos did save me. As for helping Ron," Noah paused. "This involves a huge secret. This secret is related to the Scourge Church. I have a feeling that the key to unlocking this secret lies with Ron." "What secret?" Mary asked curiously. Noah smiled but did not answer. Mary shrugged. She knew better than to ask further. Since her master didn't want to answer, it was useless to ask further. The two of them continued to look at the triangular tower in the distance. Within the triangular tower, Ron's absorption of the soul force had reached a critical point. Countless soul forces surged into his body and into his consciousness, strengthening his soul. At this moment, Ron's forehead was covered in sweat. He still had his eyes closed as he quietly absorbed. Ron watched his soul force continue to expand. His heart was filled with shock. At this moment, his consciousness was almost filled to the brim with soul force. It was like a sealed pool that was filled to the brim with water, but still continued to fill. He had never thought that soul force could increase to such a degree. It's still increasing. It's still increasing. Ron looked at the increasing soul force in his consciousness and muttered, "Heavens! Just how much more soul force do I need to reach the sacred domain?" Ron's strength had long reached the peak of the master level. He originally thought that breaking through the sacred domain would be a matter of minutes. Perhaps in the near future, he would be able to break through the sacred domain and become a true powerhouse of the sacred domain. But now, even after absorbing so much soul power, there were still no signs of a breakthrough. At this moment, he finally understood that there was only a thin barrier between the peak of the master level and the sanctuary realm, and this thin barrier was an insurmountable gap. Just a little bit more, and it would be impossible to cross it. The only thing that could be crossed was the sacred domain. Many master-level powerhouses were stuck in front of this gap, unable to break through for the rest of their lives. Hurry up. Absorb faster. At this moment, Ron was a little anxious. His heart trembled unconsciously. If I don't hurry up, Ron gritted his teeth. His consciousness began to revolve wildly. At the same time, the speed at which he absorbed the soul force around him increased by 10 times. This was a very dangerous move. Madly absorbing foreign soul force like this was very dangerous. This untamed soul force was filled with violence. After entering an unfamiliar soul, it would run wild. Ron also knew that this was a very dangerous move. However, he couldn't care less because he sensed that 4 of the 5 black crystal coins in the magic formation above his head had already been used. The origin energy contained in the 4 black crystal coins had already been converted into soul force and entered his consciousness. If he couldn't break through even after the last black crystal coin was used up, it would mean that all his efforts would be in vain. As for the surrounding soul power, it was obvious that the surrounding soul power had weakened. But that wasn't all. After absorbing a lot of undigested soul force, Ron's consciousness suddenly shook. He felt a sharp pain in his head. No, not good. Ron was shocked, and a bad premonition arose in his heart. He had gone too far. At this moment, Ron was filled with regret. He immediately focused his mind and tried his best to control the chaotic soul force. Unfortunately, it was too late. His soul force began to collapse. In his consciousness, countless soul forces were running wild, constantly attacking his soul. The soul force that had been controlled by his soul began to backfire. The black sea-like soul force were like rebellious soldiers, attacking their commander. Chaos. Everything was in chaos. Under the backlash of the soul force, Ron's consciousness began to collapse. His fragile soul, under the assault of the violent soul force, let out a painful howl. The little person in Ron's mind became distorted due to the invasion of the soul force. Ugh! Ron's body moved. He suddenly spat out a large mouthful of blood. This meant that his soul had been injured. Although it didn't look like he was injured, the injury to his soul was more serious than an external injury. No matter how hard Ron tried, he couldn't control the violent soul force. At this moment, the origin energy outside his body was also in disorder. On a distant hillside, a gentle wind gently blew. At this moment, Noah's eyes were staring into the distance. His brows were knitted tighter and tighter. After a long time, he finally let out a soft sigh. It seems that Ron has failed. Noah shook his head. His mind was still too impatient, causing the power to backfire. Mary also let out a soft sigh. It seemed that the 5 black crystal coins that her master gave to Ron had been wasted. The chaotic soul force was constantly overflowing from Ron's body, causing his own soul force to drain away. Is there really no other way? Ron was so anxious that his forehead was covered in sweat. At this moment, he finally panicked. No matter how hard he tried, it was useless. The small stream had become a surging river. In front of the surging river, his weak soul force was like a small boat that could capsize at any time. If Ron lost all of his soul force, he would lose everything and become a powerless ordinary person. This was the price of blood. However, this lesson was too heavy for Ron. After a while, he would be left with nothing. Ron's heart had already sunk into despair. At this moment, in Ron's almost empty sea of consciousness, there was a sudden commotion. The commotion came from the depths of his soul. The whirlpool above Ron's soul suddenly changed and started to spin crazily. The loss of soul force seemed to have heard the call of its master and started to slow down. What's going on? Ron opened his eyes wide. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Seeing that he was about to become a cripple, he finally saw a glimmer of hope at this moment. It was the soul ring. It was the power of the soul ring. At this moment, the main body that was absorbing the soul force was the soul ring. In front of the small soul ring, the incomparably violent soul force became as docile as a sheep. Not only that, the lost soul force also started to return and replenish the already empty sea of consciousness. His sea of consciousness instantly became full. Ron's soul started to calm down, and his sea of consciousness started to expand. In just an instant, there was such a shocking reversal. Not only that, the soul ring was also crazily absorbing the external soul force. At this moment, the soul barrier that had trapped Ron for a long time finally had a crack. There's no hope. There's no hope, forget it. Let's go. After a while, Noah saw that the situation didn't improve. His face was filled with disappointment. He shook his head and sighed. Step by step, he walked down the hill. Mary let out a long sigh. Her face was filled with regret. They had already tried their best. It was Ron who didn't live up to expectations. He couldn't blame anyone else. Noah's heart was heavy. He walked down the hill step by step. No one knew what he was thinking. His foot slipped, and he almost fell. Master, be careful. Mary supported him. Noah shook his head and pushed Mary away, indicating that he was fine. Suddenly, Noah's heart skipped a beat. He abruptly turned his head and looked into the distance. His eyes flashed with an inconceivable light. Master, what's wrong? Mary felt that something was wrong with her master and hurriedly asked. At this moment, the triangular tower had already undergone a shocking change. Within the triangular tower, the chaotic aura suddenly changed. It became orderly and vigorous. At the same time, an incomparably tyrannical energy overflowed from the tower. It was like an eruption of a mountain. Its might shook the entire heaven and earth. Impossible. Ron, he broke through? Mary opened her eyes wide. Her face was filled with disbelief. Didn't he completely collapse because he absorbed too much energy? Noah smiled and said, looks like this kid's luck is pretty good. Within the triangular tower, a black aura rushed into the sky. It was like a natural disaster had descended. It emitted a strange and terrifying aura. Countless clouds of smoke floated into the air and covered half the sky. It was a clear day, but now it was completely dark. Within the small semicircular stone, Ron suddenly opened his eyes. His pitch-black eyes shot out a bright light. He quietly felt the vast star-like soul force flowing through his body. His heart was filled with joy. Success! I've finally succeeded. Ron couldn't help but clench his fists. He looked up to the sky and roared. This soul force was too powerful. It filled his body and felt very real. He had never thought that his soul force would become so powerful one day. Chapter 528. Let's go and take a look. Noah said with a smile as he led Mary towards the huge triangular tower. Since he has already reached the sacred domain, then I have to tell him about that matter. Ron's pornographic novel. In his sea of consciousness, there was a huge soul body that looked like an indomitable giant. The body that was formed by soul power was very thick and solid. It looked no different from a real person. His body was covered by a layer of membrane. Beneath his feet was a huge sea of consciousness. The black seawater that was constantly churning was a vast and boundless soul power. Ron quietly scanned his own body. He could only feel that his soul power had reached an extremely large level. This enormous soul power was like an inexhaustible treasure trove. No matter how he squandered it, it was endless. At the same time, with his powerful soul power, even his sixth senses had become extremely sensitive. Ron expanded his spiritual senses. Within a radius of 10 miles, he could see everything. The birds in the distance were screaming and flapping their small wings. On the ground, a group of ants was slowly crawling. With a sweep of his spiritual senses, he didn't even miss a single thing. Sacred domain. This is the power of the sacred domain. Ron felt the surging soul power. A strong sense of pride and confidence welled up in his heart. He felt that everything was under his control. At this moment, Ron's heart moved. He planned to tell this news to his most respected and beloved Grandpa Homelin. Ron's consciousness entered the soul ring and searched for traces of Homelin. His consciousness entered the soul ring in the form of a soul and arrived in front of the huge palace of bones. It didn't take much effort for him to enter. Ron came in front of the huge crystal coffin. When he opened it, he was stunned. His eyes were wide open. The crystal coffin was empty. Where's Grandpa Homelin? Ron was shocked. He searched the entire hall, but didn't find any trace of Homelin's grandpa. At this moment, he saw Noah and Mary slowly walking into the triangular hall. Could it be? Ron was shocked. He remembered that before he fainted, Grandpa Homelin had been fine, but after he fainted, Ron could not help but be suspicious. Lord Noah, Miss Mary. Ron's spiritual sense returned to his body. He immediately stood up and bowed deeply to the two. Noah smiled. Ron, congratulations. Mary also smiled. Congratulations on becoming a powerhouse of the sacred domain. Of course, I have to thank Lord Noah for his help. Ron said modestly. His mind was spinning rapidly, thinking about how to tell Noah the doubts in his heart. Unexpectedly, Noah laughed. Ron, it's good that you've become a powerhouse of the sacred domain. I'm just about to do something. Ron, come with me. Ron was puzzled, but he still followed Noah out of the triangular tower. On a luxurious bed, a thin and weak figure was lying there. He was wearing a black necromancer's robe. His eyes were closed, as if he was asleep. This was an old man that he did not recognize at all. His face was somewhat similar to Homelin's. His skin was white with a hint of wrinkles, and the veins on his thin hands were exposed. They gave off a cold feeling. Although his eyes were closed, there was a hint of red on his face. Surprisingly, he was breathing weakly. The person lying on the bed was actually a living person. Lord Noah, what's going on? Ron raised his head and looked at Noah with a questioning gaze. Noah smiled and said, After you fell unconscious, I discovered another soul in your soul. It's the teacher who taught you necromancy, Sir Homelin. I talked with him for a long time, and he told me many things. Noah pushed up his glasses. Logically speaking, with Sir Homelin's strength, he could have used some method to take over your body, but he didn't. Noah smiled. It's obvious that he treats you well. Ron's eyes were a little moist. Grandfather Homelin had always been watching his growth, teaching him necromancy, waiting for him to become stronger day by day. He was even willing to sacrifice his own life to protect him. How could he be described as well? As for taking over Ron's body, Homelin would never do such a thing. Sir Homelin has always wanted to rebuild the Scourge Church and restore the former glory of the Scourge Church. This has always been his wish. And this wish, Noah glanced at Ron and said, as the successor of the Scourge Church, he hopes that you will be the one to complete it. He made 2 requests to me. The first was for me to help you increase your strength, to at least reach the sacred domain. The second was for me to find a suitable body for him to resurrect. I agreed to both of his requests, Noah said with a smile on his face. Ron took a deep breath. He now understood everything. It turned out that Grandfather Homelin had always been helping him. Ron gently grabbed the hand of the unfamiliar Homelin, tears streaming down his face. That unfamiliar body had a trace of warmth, as if it was in a deep sleep. After a while, Ron gently wiped his eyes. Lord Noah, when will Grandfather Homelin wake up? I separated Homelin's soul from your body, then found a body that was compatible with him in all aspects to resurrect him. Everything went smoothly, but he will need some time to adapt to this new body. During this time, he will be in a deep sleep. Noah said, "Ron, don't worry. He is very safe here." Noah smiled. "Thank you, Lord Noah." Ron sighed in relief and sincerely thanked Noah. "Go. Ron, do what you should do." Noah waved his hand and said, "Perhaps when your teacher wakes up and sees that you have achieved his wish, he will be very happy. I will definitely." Ron stood up and replied, his dark eyes shining with determination. On the bustling street, all kinds of people were shuttling back and forth. Among them were mercenaries and merchants. Most of the people walking on the street were mercenaries in a hurry. They were travel-worn, and no one was willing to look back. On the window displays on both sides of the street, there were women who were selling their looks. They were gorgeously dressed, making flirtatious gestures, and were placed there for people to admire like merchandise. Under the display window, a beggar was kneeling on the ground, holding a broken bowl in his shabby clothes, forming a strong contrast with the beautiful women on the display window. This was a world of money. Here, hundreds of quests would be issued every day. There were all kinds of quests to choose from. There were easy ones, normal ones, and difficult ones. Every minute here, there would be over 1 million gold coins being traded. Some are even interplanar missions. These missions could only be completed after leaving the Noah continent. Of course, interplanar missions weren't something that anyone could do. At the very least, one needed the strength of the sacred domain. This was the headquarters of the Mercenary Union. Ron didn't know where Noah lived. Only after leaving his residence did he find out that Lord Noah lived in the headquarters of the Mercenary Union. However, Noah's residence had been designated as a forbidden area and was heavily guarded. Others couldn't easily enter. Ron learned from Mary that Lord Noah was the actual controller of the Mercenary Union. Many interplanar missions were issued by him. Even some powerhouses of the sacred domain or the divine domain had to accept missions from him. Of course, the rewards for these missions weren't calculated in gold coins. They were transactions between black crystal coins. The amount involved in these transactions was enormous. Therefore, everyone on the Noah continent would give some face to the Mercenary Union, including Fairy Dragon Frigga and Dark Dragon Firth of the Parliament. Of course, Noah was also a businessman. He also sold some things. The interplanar store was his property. Every item sold in the store was of the highest quality. Moreover, they were all priced in black crystal coins. Ordinary people couldn't afford them. Noah would issue missions, and when someone completed them, they would turn in the mission items and earn the difference in price. Then, he would sell the highest quality goods. Many of the black crystal coins earned from issuing missions would return to his hands after a round. The interplanar store might be small, but in terms of wealth, the entire continent couldn't compare to it. "I'll see you off here. Ron, take care," Mary said with a smile as she led Ron out of the restricted area and arrived at the plaza of the Mercenary Union. "Thank you, Mary. I'm indebted to you for taking care of me all this time." Ron smiled and bowed, bidding her farewell. Ron strolled along the streets of the Mercenary Union, looking at the bustling main road. He seemed a little absent-minded. Even though his strength had reached the level of the sacred domain, when faced with the heavy responsibility of rebuilding the Scourge Church, as well as the request from Grandpa Homelin, he always felt a sense of helplessness. He had no money, no land, and only Ron was all alone. How was he going to establish a huge force? He couldn't just point at a random building and say that it was the Scourge Church, could he? Ron's head hurt from thinking about it. Forget it. Let's not worry about this for now. Should I still go to Dragon Island to see my mother? Ron sighed and thought silently. Thump! Ron accidentally bumped into a human mercenary. The large human mercenary saw that Ron was a young lad and assumed that he wasn't very strong. He glared at him and took a stance as he scolded, "Damn it, you brat. Don't you look where you're going? I'm sorry." Ron knew that he was in the wrong and took the initiative to apologize. However, that person still didn't let him go. He was still scolding and looking like he was about to attack. Hee hee, this brat is in trouble. One of the surrounding mercenaries gloated. That person is a great swordsman, right? Look at how smug he is. Another mercenary was a little dissatisfied. Tell me, how do you want to compensate? The large mercenary said fiercely. Ron didn't have time to argue with him. He shrugged, and his body became light as he rose up. Damn it, don't even think about leaving. The large mercenary had just started cursing when he swallowed it back down. At this moment, his mouth was wide open in shock as he looked at Ron, who was floating in the air in disbelief. Sacred Domain Powerhouse? Looking at Ron, who was floating in the air, even the stupidest person knew what was going on. None of the surrounding mercenaries would have thought that this young lad, who looked like he was 17 or 18 years old, was actually a powerful powerhouse from the Sacred Domain. It's over. That large guy is dead for sure. One of the surrounding mercenaries shook his head helplessly with a look of pity. Those young powerhouses from the Sacred Domain were mostly young and hot-blooded. They were passionate about showing off their strength and would kill without a word. The large guy saw this and knelt down. Sir, please spare my life. Sir, please spare my life. This lowly one has old and young to take care of. That guy cried as he slapped himself heavily in the face. When that fellow cried bitterly and begged for mercy, he found that Ron had already quietly left at some point. He actually left? The surrounding mercenaries were shocked. Some of them saw that there was no more drama to watch and directly left. Huff! Huff! That large mercenary powerlessly sat on the ground. His clothes were already drenched in cold sweat. His calves were still trembling. Just a moment ago, he felt that he had already taken a trip to hell. Now that he escaped, he secretly rejoiced. Ron didn't bicker with him. Instead, he turned around and floated away. If he wanted to kill that great swordsman mercenary, it would be very easy, but he didn't do so. Although Ron had the strength of the Sacred Domain, he didn't use it to compete with others. He also didn't use it to act cool and bully others. His mind was much more mature than the average youth of his age. Powerful soul force covered his whole body. Ron's body turned into a black fog and flashed through the sky like a meteor. His goal was Dragon Island. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.